All right, good afternoon and welcome to the regular meeting of Council and General Committee for Monday, September 27th, 2021. Just want to note before we head into O Canada, we do have a couple of staff that will be joining us on Zoom. We have John Kukalis, who's attending in place of Director Daryl Smith. Sabrina Maselli will be here in attendance in place of Director Brian York, and Margaret Josiopovic, Michael Seaman, and Claire Semple will be attending for item 9.2. So we will go with O Canada and then a moment of silence, and then we will be looking to the Deputy Mayor Phillips to read the land acknowledgement. So after the moment of silence, we'll be seated, and then Councillor Phillips will do the land acknowledgement. Thank you.
O Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all of us command, car ton bras s'est porté le pays, il s'est porté la croix. Ton histoire est une épopée des plus brillants exploits. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
All right, thank you very much for that, and thank you for the moment of personal reflection, as that has been a part of the custom of our in-person council meetings, and it was wonderful to hear the rendition of O Canada, and I'm confident that we'll be hearing more of that during the MLB playoffs when the Jays make the playoffs. So I'm going to be passing it over to Councillor Phillips for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We acknowledge that the land on which council meets today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to work and live here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering space is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this is a reminder that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of the Indigenous people. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Phillips. Appreciate that. And just following up on that with the Mayor's report, I'm just going to start with Thursday, September 30th, which is coming up this week, is the first annual National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada and Orange Shirt Day. As we are continuing on our own journey of reconciliation, the city will start the day with a special flag-raising ceremony with the Niagara Region Native Centre and local Indigenous community leaders at 10 a.m. on City Hall grounds. Everyone is welcome. Masks and social distancing will be followed. From there, a program of virtual learning opportunities has been put together for city staff and council to participate through the day. There will also be many resources that will be shared online for the community, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. I'd like to invite all residents of St. Catharines to join us for this day of learning and reflection. For the community and viewers, there are excellent resources available. The Niagara Region Native Centre or Fort Erie Native Friendship Centre have websites that have excellent information on the Truth and Reconciliation and what we can do in our community. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation website includes videos and interactive exhibits. The Every Child Matters page at the Woodland Cultural Centre website has excellent material on that subject, as well as September 30th, we encourage everyone to wear an orange shirt in remembrance of the thousands of Indigenous children who were sent away to residential schools and didn't come home, and for all those who survived for Orange Shirt Day. I will add just a bit of personal reflection that in working with our CAO, there was a lot of discussion about having a, quote, holiday. And some municipalities and some communities are giving the day off of staff. And I have to applaud our senior team here. They worked closely with the Niagara Region Native Center. And this isn't, quote, the holiday where someone decides to take a day off and take their kids to the outlet malls or the Penn Center or whatever. This is a day of reflection. This is a day of learning. And I got to give credit to the CAO and his team for creating a learning opportunity for all of our staff. No matter what department we have here at the city, whether it's the Lake Street Yard or the museum or the library or the different community centers, there will be an opportunity for our staff to participate in real-time online learning around Indigenous issues and the importance of this day moving forward. This is the first national day of truth and reconciliation here in our country, and what I hope is that what we're setting the standard for here in St. Catharines, other communities will follow suit in Niagara and recognize that this should be a day in which we encourage and bring our staff on this journey of reflection, and at the same time work closely with our Indigenous brothers and sisters. I will tell you from working with the Niagara Region Native Center, this is going to be a very somber day for them. A lot of them are in pain. They're experiencing a lot of sorrow and trauma, and for them it's a day for which they can come together as a community and feel each other's sorrow and support each other in that way. So it's an important day for all of us, and I know Council has been very supportive, and I just want to say thank you to our CAO and staff for what they've done. Last Monday, there was the federal election, and on behalf of City Council, I just want to say congratulations to all the candidates who put their name forward to represent St. Catharines, and a special congratulations to those who were re-elected. Our St. Catharines MP, Chris Biddle, was re-elected, as well as St. Catharines Centre Vance Badaway, and representing Niagara West, Dean Allison. Now, I reference those three because all three actually represent portions of our community. MP Biddle represents the largest part, but MP Badaway and MP Allison also represent parts of our community. Also in Niagara, MP Tony Baldinelli was also re-elected. So now it is the time for, I would like to thank all the candidates who ran with integrity and passion in our community, and thank them for having the courage to put their name on the ballot. As we've seen, it's not easy in today's polarized world, but so many of you rose above and ran solid, competitive campaigns and a lot of positivity. Now it's time for us to get back to work together on the issues that Canadians are facing every day: affordable housing, investing in climate change, resilient infrastructure, investing in mental health care, the opioid crisis, and rebuilding from the pandemic. Cities need federal partners, and the City of St. Catharines is ready to work to get that done. I also want to give a big thank you to the community for the outpouring of support and positive messages I received over the past 2 weeks since my home was vandalized. I do not believe this represents the people of St. Catharines. We are a welcoming, inclusive, compassionate community, and while the last year and a half has been tough on all of us, I know that we always will come together, and that we each have each other's back. And I got to tell you that the community really had my back over the last 2 weeks. The outpouring of support online, personal notes to my office, personal phone calls, really does show how together as a community we are. Regardless of who this would happen to, I think people would have all stepped up and done the same thing. So it's not about me as an individual, it's about us coming together as a community. Last week, I hosted a roundtable for youth substance abuse in our community, and Councillor Dodge was able to participate. It was something that I have been coordinating for a while with. A father in our community, his son has passed away from an overdose, and it was because of Steve's push to address this growing issue in our community that we convened a working group. We met last week with a lot of the stakeholders in Niagara, from the healthcare system to those working on the front lines, the social agencies, Niagara Regional Police, the Niagara Region. We had members of city staff, including our CAO, talking about what we can do as a community to help push back at what's an alarming growing trend, which is youth substance abuse. It's something that has grown over the last 2 years, and I think as any parent would want, we've got to do what we can to try and encourage and develop programming and better access to services for those who are struggling through addictions. And if we can get them at the youth, at a younger age, I believe that their outcomes long-term will be better for them. So I just want to thank everybody who participated in that, and we'll be meeting again to develop a work plan, and there will be more information coming from that. As well, last week, I visited several arenas as part of the vaccine certification policy that was brought forward by the province of Ontario. I went by a couple of the arenas to learn about the new screening and check-in process. And like all communities across Ontario, all visitors are now required to present proof of vaccination in entering arenas, rec centers, pools, and public spaces. And I got to say that the city's team has put together a very quick and easy process to get you checked in. Just being at the site gave me great confidence in our staff. This didn't happen overnight. Our staff have been working tirelessly to ensure that our community had access to the facilities in a way that was both welcoming, reassuring, and as quick as possible to access the facility. Obviously, there's going to be a few disgruntled people, and that was experienced last week, and that was to be assumed because this isn't easy for everybody to understand why it's important that we do this. But I got to say to the volunteers of all the associations, to the staff, and to the leadership team, what I saw last week and over the weekend really does validate all the hard work that our staff are putting into this. If you haven't received both doses of the COVID-19 vaccine, there are many quick and easy ways to get one. Contact the public health, your local pharmacy, or talk to your doctor. There's too much misinformation that's still circulating online. And I want to give a special thank you to Dr. Deck, who's the chair of the task force, the vaccine task force. He helped an individual over the weekend who had hesitancy around allergies. And he was very easily to put it into clear language about the misinformation that's circulating online about the allergic reactions and what causes it. In fact, pointing out that while there may be allergies to Pfizer and Moderna because they use a certain substance, that same substance isn't used in AstraZeneca, so you can get the AstraZeneca shot. So there's opportunities out there when it comes to even the allergies to learn from your medical practitioner. So it's not from me, you're not hearing it from me, but from a medical practitioner to really have that discussion. And I think if everyone just does their part, we can get through this more quickly than people anticipate. This weekend was also the start of Culture Days, a month of cultural activities celebrating the arts in our community. Throughout the pandemic, arts and culture has been one of the hardest hit sectors, and it's a great opportunity to support them over the next month. There's over 100 arts and culture activities to participate in until October 24th. Check out the city's website, St. Catharines Culture Days, and you'll get more information. Last year, we ranked #1 in delivering the most arts and cultural experiences, and I'm confident we'll be able to retain that as well. I'm going to just quickly take a... Okay. Also, there's an engagement process underway. We're asking the public to provide feedback on public transit in Niagara. This is your opportunity to tell us why transit is important as we work on a plan for a potential Niagara-wide transit system. This is about the future of the region for economic development, jobs, healthcare, school, and social services, but we've got to get it right. And so we're looking for as much information and feedback that we can get from the public. This has been an incredible journey that we've been on. A lot of research and work has gone into this, and now it's your turn as the public to have an opportunity to provide your feedback on moving transit forward. So if you check out the website, movingtransitforward.ca, you'll have access to it. It's linked from our page at the City of St. Catharines. All municipalities are promoting this link, and it's very important. If you use transit and want to be able to get to school, work, healthcare, continue to drive Niagara's economy forward, we need your opinion and your feedback. And again, it's to make sure that when we make our final decision as councils, we'll have the most informed feedback from the public possible. I just want to also congratulate Niagara Children's Centre and the Superheroes Run, and I'm just going to quickly turn it over to Councillor Cisco, who's just going to tell us how much they raised as part of the Superheroes Run.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It was a very successful weekend Children's Center was able to raise over $100,000, $102,345 at last count. And that's money that will go to support all of the programming that goes on up at the Children's Center. So if I can just very quickly say thank you to the over 150 volunteers that we had out for the run on Saturday, as well as to CEO Oksana Fisher and our Director of Development, Marla Smith, who did a fantastic job getting this going. The goal this year was $75,000, so they blew past that target, and it was just great to see the community come together and raise funds for an important cause during the pandemic.
Thank you, Councillor Cisco, and as chair of the Niagara Children's Center, thank you for your commitment in our community. I can assure you that Councillor Williamson and myself will be there next year, as I was experiencing a lower body injury. I don't know about Councillor Williamson, but we'll be out there to shore up the last place finishes next year. Congratulations to the Nitsopoulos family on the grand opening of Austin's, a new restaurant in the Holiday Inn on Ontario Street. This wraps up the final piece of the major development of the hotel, and I was there to cut the big ribbon as the Nitsopoulos family, who have been a long, proud history in St. Catharines. They have invested over $2 million just into the new restaurant. It is a gorgeous new facility here in St. Catharines. It's an exquisite place. The food is outstanding. And so if you have an opportunity, check out the Austin restaurant over at the Parkway Social, part of the Holiday Inn, and you will be impressed. It's an amazing new renovation that welcomes people into our community, just as we're hopefully coming out of COVID-19 as well. And like all restaurants in the tourism sector, many have been struggling through the pandemic, and today the province announced a new funding program to support tourism. The Ontario Tourism Recovery Program will support tourism businesses that have lost 50% of revenue compared to pre-pandemic periods. The funding will help businesses reopen safely, be innovative, create jobs, get people back to work in the tourism sector. Our economic development and tourism staff will be reaching out to all local businesses in getting them the help to use this funding as well. For this, I just want to turn it over now to our CAO for a public and staff vaccine policy update, as well as recovery and opening messages.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I guess I'll provide an update to council just on the status of our employee vaccine policy. The policy itself went to all employees today, and it has a phase-in approach for the mandatory vaccination for all of our employees and volunteers. So that is happening, following up to the memos that I had provided to council previously. That also aligns with some of the provincial mandates that came forward last week through the vaccination certification program on Wednesday. Director Christie will provide a bit more specifics on how that rolled out with the teams, but just a shout out to our entire staff across the entire corporation. It hasn't been an easy month of the pandemic for any of us, dealing with putting policies forward, but also trying to manage some of these provincial mandates that are coming quickly and furiously in very short order. So we've been able to implement a lot of these policies in a time that we're continuing to move the business of the city forward. So just a shout out to our entire senior leadership team, all of the managers, supervisors, frontline staff who've been able to deal with this. Specifically with regard to the September 22nd certification program, we have implemented this across all of our recreational facilities as well as City Hall and the museum. We've done this for two purposes. One being, it's to protect the public, but also it's to protect our own employees. And we wanted to make sure that we treated all of our facilities equally, so that's what we wanted to do, and that's what we've since been able to do so. As a result, we have had to hire some additional contracted services just to help support our teams at the front line, at the arenas in particular, just to manage patron issues, questions that come forward. Not everybody is receptive to providing a vaccination passport certification, so we've had to supplement our own staff team with some additional resources. We're hoping as this evolves, we'll be able to reduce that. In the report that I provided, it's approximately $20,000 is what we've budgeted for that additional amount of resourcing. In addition to the certification program, we were also given word on Friday that capacity limits have increased. So in particular, the Performing Arts Center and the Meridian Center, which will be impacted positively from the standpoint of having more patrons be able to come into the facilities. Both groups are working through that as we speak, and our staff, along with the staff of both the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre and Meridian Centre, have been working in conjunction on that. But I wanted at this point just to pass it over to Director Christie, just to give a bit more specific examples of the amount of work and time and energy that has gone into the certification program, in particular in our recreational facilities. Phil?
Thank you, Mr. Oakes. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Council. So last Wednesday, September 22nd, was the first day that proof of vaccination was going to be expected to be part of the process to access our recreation facilities. Members of council should be pleased to hear that city staff and volunteers have done very well in welcoming our patrons into our facilities. Our patrons, for the most part, have been patient, pleasant, and thankful, actually, for the job that staff are doing. We've had a few bumps along the road, but Team STC has handled them professionally and respectfully. I'd also like to inform council that our ICE user partners, the folks who rent our ice, have stood by our side. They've helped to make the entry and screening process much smoother. They've helped to communicate the protocols to their members, to their patrons, to their customers, to the families that they deal with. So that has been a huge help, not only to the staff, but also to the process. We've had volunteers working with our staff. Mr. Jim Richardson, the chair of our Recreation Master Plan Advisory Committee, was there with us on the first couple of nights. So, just as an example of, the handful of volunteers that have assisted staff in this regard. In the days leading up to September 22nd, Team STC worked with our ICE user groups and our team members who were going to be out in the field to prepare for the new protocols. So we discussed scenarios and responses to different scenarios. We also worked with our recreation colleagues from our neighboring municipalities to ensure that we are all approaching this initiative, this new protocol, in a consistent way, which we hope will go a long way in terms of alignment towards a cross-municipal facility access experience. So, while it hasn't been without fault or without any issues, for the most part, I am happy to report that we've done well, and we want to thank our community as well for respecting the regulations and for being patient and being great to work with, actually. So thank you.
Thank you, CAO Oakes and Director Christie. Okay, adoption of the agenda. We have the following items, and I'll turn it over to the clerk. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the agenda? Councillor Sorrento, Councillor Garcia, and then we have some amendments to the clerk.
Yes, thank you. This evening's, adoption of the agenda this evening. The following items have been placed in Council's Sugar Sink folder. Confidential memorandum from the Manager of Realty and Insurance Services regarding 320 Geneva Street negotiations update. 2, memorandum from the Manager of Diversity, Equity and Inclusion regarding the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, an update. And the following amendments are being made to this evening's agenda. Amendment to Bylaw E on the bylaw list. In the description of the bylaw, the information in parentheses should read, 1 reading with respect to removal of holding provision for 104 Maple Street, 9799 Niagara Street, and 101-103 Niagara Street. Delegation of powers and duties bylaw number 2020-156. Item 9.2, 2020 Community Improvement Plan, 2020 CIP, evaluation of new application for 57A, 61, and 63 Lakeport Road will be discussed prior to item 9.1. We have speakers on 9.2 this evening. The motion for item 6.2, council correspondence, sub-item 1, resolution from the City of Thorold regarding stiffer penalties for infractions relating to the importation, production, or distribution of fentanyl, is being amended to endorse the resolution rather than just file and receive the resolutions. And those are the amendments this evening.
Okay, thank you, Council. Councillor Harris, sorry, you got your hand up.
I would like to add Mr. Tom Rankin and Ms. Wendy Wing to speak regarding item 9.2.
Okay, and to the clerk. That's in addition of the delegations. We just have a show of hands. Okay, all in favor of the delegation added to the list? Any opposed? Okay, that's carried. Councillor Townsend and then Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add to the 6.21 resolution from the City of Thorold to include all Ontario municipalities, just because it does go a lot. It's a much stronger motion when you include all of the municipalities factoring in on this resolution. Thank you.
Okay. Clerk, that'll be friendly. Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Littleton.
Mr. Mayor, I was just voting to approve the delegates. Thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Okay. All in favor of the agenda as presented and amended? And that's carried. Thank you. Okay, adoption of the minutes. The council adopt the minutes of the meeting of council held on Monday, September 23rd, 2001. Councillor Phillips, you're moving that. Seconded by Councillor Dodge. Can you move that? Okay. Any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. Any conflicts of interest today? Seeing no conflicts of interest, it is a smaller agenda. Move to consent items, and so I'll look to the clerk for the consent item, and a mover and a seconder for the consent item. Councillor Dodge, Councillor Kushner, and I'll look to the clerk for call to question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, this evening's consent agenda 6.1, Office of the CAO, COVID-19 updates, September 27th, 2021, and Legal and Clerk Services, Office of the City Clerk, Council Correspondence. Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
And Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
Carried unanimously.
Okay, there's no public meetings and there's no presentations, and so we are going to go into 9.2, which we have another number of delegates on. And this is the declaration. Councillor Garcia?
Mr. Mayor, just a point of order. Before we get into 9.2, I would just like to ask for a ruling as to why this is not a reconsideration, since we have already voted down CIP for exactly the same project before.
Okay, I'll turn it over to the clerk because I think she has an answer.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe the program has changed. I thought it was a new application and a new program, and I didn't consider it a reconsideration.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still think it's a reconsideration. We discussed this in great detail before for the same project, so I would like to appeal that ruling, please.
Okay, so as the chair, I'm ruling that it's not a reconsideration. So if you're going to challenge the chair, you could challenge the chair. And then
I can appeal it, yes.
Okay, I'll look to the clerk. Challenging the chair has gone with staff recommendation, which is not a reconsideration. Okay, the next step.
If council wishes, they would need to now vote.
Okay. Would you like to challenge the chair as a council? Okay, challenge of the chair, so we'll take a vote of council challenging the chair.
Yes.
And it's no debate on the challenge of the chair.
No. Can I have a
Point
recorded
of
vote,
order,
please?
Mr. Mayor.
Pardon me? Just wait.
Just a point of order, Mr. Mayor. Can you explain what a yes or a no vote means in this case? Is a yes vote upholding the chair? Or
Yes,
is
a yes is in support of the chair, a no is against the chair's ruling, essentially. Okay, there's no debate on this, and a recorded vote is requested. So I'll turn it over to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. On the challenge to the chair, Councillor Williamson.
No.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
No.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Garcia.
No.
Councillor Dodge.
No.
And that's lost. The chair stands.
Thank you for that, Council. So I'll read a declaration to all presenters. Council chambers in all municipalities in our country represent the seed of local democracy. The many acts that govern us understand the necessity of the collective voice when decisions are being made to grow our spaces, pass our bylaws, and seek opinions into very complex issues. We recognize the right of the majority to decide, the minority to be heard, and the public to have an opportunity to participate, and all participants to be treated with courtesy and respect. It is imperative that elected officials, citizens, and staff have input, but it is paramount that we listen to one another and question one another, but that we understand we do this in a way that never undermines any person's abilities or their dignity into our chambers. In saying that, if there are any presentations that start to go in a certain direction, I've talked to the city clerk. The person will be muted, and they will be told why they're muted. And if they continue to either speak in a derogatory or disrespectful way, they'll just be muted permanently and they won't be allowed to participate in this discussion. So there's zero tolerance in this chamber for people to be disrespectful to staff and to council. So I just want that to be known as we head into this discussion today. So we now have Planning and Building Services, who will talk about 2020 Community Improvement Plan, which is a new CIP that was just approved last November. This is the first applicant that has been received by council under the new Community Improvement Plan. Applicant for 57A, 61 and 63 Lakeport Road. Those who know the address would also know it as the old Lincoln Fabrics building, an old industrial lot. Prior to the delegations, I will call on the Director of Planning and Building Services to provide an overview of the staff report. And I would say that I would like to mention that Mr. Rosen and Mr. Lou Falco are available to address questions from council, but they are not making a delegation tonight. And we will now turn it over to the Director of Planning and Building Services, and then we will go into the delegations from the following individuals. So Director of Planning and Building Services.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to council, the public, and the participants connected here this evening. In November 2020, Council approved the new Community Improvement Plan for the City of St. Catharines. Community Improvement Plans are a tool used to provide incentives to stimulate private sector investment in targeted areas of the community and to achieve certain strategic city building goals. There was extensive consultation with the public, development industry, and Council. It led to the city's CIP prioritizing revitalization, brownfield remediation, heritage preservation, and targeted mixed-use intensification, among other objectives that were identified in Council's strategic plan, the Garden City Official Plan, and the city's Housing Action Plan. The city's CIP outlines guiding principles, policies, eligibility, evaluation, scoring criteria, as well as calculation methodology. This transparency makes it clear to council, applicants, and the public as to how applications will be considered and if any incentives will be granted. We heard from the development industry that predictability and certainty in the process was critical in their decision-making process on whether or not to invest in a property. Properties that are challenged by expensive factors such as environmental remediation and heritage preservation are often at a disadvantage of other unencumbered sites. Yet they are often located in the most central of locations where revitalization, mixed-use development, and increases in density are warranted and encouraged. The application for consideration tonight is for 57A, 61, and 63 Lakeport Road, commonly referred to as the Harbor Club. The development proposal seeks a brownfield tax increment finance incentive to undertake significant brownfield remediation, heritage preservation, and private investment to turn a vacant and derelict rubber factory into a mixed-use housing development. The property is currently assessed at $3.1 million in value, and the city collects approximately $38,000 annually in taxes. Post-development, the property is anticipated to be assessed at $71.5 million, and the city will collect $445,938 in taxes. In addition, the city will also benefit from a public boardwalk along the waterfront and a public promenade. To clarify, Council is not making a decision on whether or not the application is worthy of a BTIF. The evaluation of the proposal against Council's eligibility, evaluation, and scoring criteria has demonstrated that the proposal scores well in this regard. Furthermore, since applying, the applicants have undertaken additional sustainability works that would have scored the application even higher. Tonight, Council is being asked to make a decision on the monetary value because the threshold of the BTIF exceeds that of which staff have delegated approval. Council is being asked to make a decision on whether an estimated annual property tax rebate of $356,750 for up to 10 years is worth an estimated post-development tax assessment of $71.5 million that would generate an annual tax payment of $445,000 moving forward. As per Council's approved CIP, the post-development assessment is capped at a 5% variance. Following the works being undertaken, if the post-development assessment comes in lower than projected, the amount of the incentive would reflect that reduction. Should the applicant receive other grants, say from the region, the province, or federal government, the amount of eligible costs will also decrease. In no case will the applicant receive more than the eligible costs. Furthermore, there will also be a sunset clause in the agreement whereby work needs to begin within 3 years and be complete within 5 years to receive any of the BTIF incentives. The incentives are not paid unless work is undertaken and verified. Verification includes having a third-party audit and an accountant statement of the invoiced works before it's even submitted to staff. In April 2019, Council declared a climate change emergency. Having a private entity invest in environmental remediation and shoreline protection of a waterfront property is a benefit to all citizens. The reuse of existing buildings and structures saves a substantial amount of waste from being diverted to a landfill. Furthermore, a minimum of 122 people will be able to call this location home, utilizing existing infrastructure and supporting businesses within a walkable distance. The requested BTIF incentive meets the core foundational pillars of Council's community improvement plan, including heritage preservation, brownfield remediation, and mixed-use redevelopment. As such, staff recommend Council approve the requested BTIF grant as outlined in staff report PBS 141, 2021. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kitse, for that summation of the report. We will now go to the delegates list. Reminding all delegates they have 5 minutes to make their comments. The comments are to be directed to the content of the staff report. So again, if it goes off topic and goes into their discussion about the project itself, I'll try and bring it back online. Just want to give everyone a heads up that it has to be, your delegation has to be to the staff report as presented. And so we just want to try and keep everyone on point, as they say. First speaker is Mr. Ray Denk. Welcome, Mr. Denk. Looking forward to having you speak today.
Okay, well, can you hear me all right?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, well, my name's Ray Denk, D-E-N-K. I'm a taxpayer here in St. Catharines. My pronouns are what you would expect them to be. I am also surprised that we're yet again discussing this revenue giveaway a third time, especially since city revenue is down during the pandemic. We're working very hard to give away money when we have a shortage of it. It's been rejected, but this project has been rejected by council once. A later motion to resume consideration was defeated. Perhaps the city needs legislation to limit the number of times the council should
Mr. Denk, can you just stay on the topic of the staff report, please?
Okay, well, the staff report, I took some notes on it, and it was very effective. If I was in the building business, I'd certainly hire Ms. Kitay. Incentive is not necessary. The disaster to the real estate business that was predicted by yourself, Mr. Mayor, at the rejection, I can't remember if it was the first time or the second time, did not happen. Actually,
Mr. Denk, I didn't talk about a disaster, so if you could just stay on the staff report, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Okay, I'm saying the incentive is not necessary. We have a real estate boom. 98% of the projects are making money without incentives. And with respect to the scoring criteria, less than 3% of this project has been allocated within the own report for environmental remediation. That even gets you points in the modified scoring percentage. It might be said, and it has been said by some, that this 2020 CIP was custom written for this project, and it increasingly seems to be the case. With respect to the amount of money involved, it's entirely elastic. The CIP is a percentage basis. If the increase in property values, even since in the last 3 years, since this was last considered, it has been going 20, 30% year over year. Compounded, it's almost 100%. So if you're paying rebates on the basis of a percentage, the number of millions of dollars given away could easily exceed the numbers presented in this report. We also, with respect to any public benefit, we already had a public boardwalk before this project. It was just fine. Actually, the developer closed off the connection between the existing footbridge and the rest of the walkway along the waterway. And we will get this assessment either way, whether we give this money away or not. This is a very desirable project. If this gentleman has not the money to finish it, as seems to be the case, then perhaps it should be sold to someone who does. We should not be the bankers on this project. It's very desirable, it's very profitable, and it's been previously called tax, what's it called? they call it welfare, corporate welfare, and some councilors objected to it. Listen, we collect taxes for the public good, roads, water, police, fire. Anyone who doesn't want to pay their taxes for 10 years freeloads off the rest of the taxpayers.
Can we just stay on the staff report, please?
Yeah, well, that's inescapable. The staff report is proposing that we give away money, and that's the outcome of giving away money. All the rest of the taxpayers are requested to pay for someone else's private property improvements. Also, no doubt we'll hear from, with respect to, I'm at a disadvantage because I haven't heard the other delegations. But I do know that a public property was sold to the developer by Historic Preservation Group, or Beautification, one or the other. And it wasn't a donation to that nonprofit. It was a cash benefit for goods received. This is historic fence. This is heritage fencing. It was on public property.
So we're not, you're off the report now, sir. So if you can stay on the staff report, that's not in the staff report.
Sir. Yes, sir. The fence was part of the boardwalk that Ms. Cadet mentioned.
But it's not in the staff report, sir.
Okay, it was part of the boardwalk, which was part of the staff report. Okay, so the numbers are completely elastic. If we have subsequent run-ups in property value, within 10 years, it's entirely possible that we're talking about double the money. Listen, there's no better criteria for people to make their decisions in the next election. If your counselor is working for private business, not you.
Time's up, Councillor. Time's up, Mr. Denks. I'm going to stop you from speaking. Thank you very much for your comments. I'm sure there will be a couple questions from your comments to staff about the valuation and how this all process works. Appreciate the input. I will now go to Mr. Hank Beekes. Mr. Beekes, you're up next.
Sorry, just point of order. Are we saving questions for all delegates to the end?
Good point. We'll take the ones, as you say, 1 through 4. And if you have questions of Mr. Denk, Mr. Beekes, Mr. Smith, and Mr. Sawyer, we'll take questions from those 4, and then the remaining, you'll take questions individually from them. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and the members of council. And I'm disappointed and saddened, I guess, that I feel the need to speak about this issue again. This project has been turned down by this council twice, and my position on CIP has been clear and principled from the start. Luxury condos should not qualify for CIP support, full stop. In the past 5 years, these units have already appreciated probably some 40%, and the public tax support is simply unnecessary. In fact, in my view, this proposal is an egregious waste of taxpayer money. There is no evidence that this virtually sold-out condo development could not be built without it. I'm going to address the actual way that the staff have addressed it. The rationale for CIP assumes that these projects would not be built otherwise, and there is no evidence of that in this case. It also falsely assumes, I think, that CIP gets credit for all investment and jobs associated with it. It seems there is little understanding between the difference between gross and net, which is one of the basics you learn in business school. When I examine the criteria, I notice a number of questionable things. First, just because an application is eligible does not mean that it should be approved. Otherwise, your role as a counselor is superfluous. At 58 points out of 100, the project barely makes it, and some of the calls, I think, are very debatable. It could just as easily have gone under 50%. For example, on remediation, this is not a toxic site. There's a very gray line between normal site preparation that you would expect and remediation. Tearing off portions of a building which you are aware of in advance and creating your own brownfield hardly deserves points. Also, with respect to heritage restoration, they get full points for heritage restoration when only half of the project qualifies. This sets a dangerous precedent, I think, especially when looking at future projects. With respect to the mixed use criteria, I don't see live-work units as mixed use. And a 370 square meters of commercial is a tiny proportion of the overall project, perhaps done only to make it qualify. The project price is something which should have a lot less points. It's biased to larger players over smaller developers, which I think we actually need. Closely related to this, and this is the heart of it, is investment in taxes, which is what this is really all about. Namely, how many dollars can we lay claim to? That should not be the prime rationale for CIP, and yet these two criteria contain the most points. I think adding value for bike parking is really stretching it. Taking out one parking spot for bike storage should be a normal part of any site plan approval. Bikes are not even mentioned in the rationale. Points for the promenade in the park is problematic in that we're really paying for things twice. Once by exceeding the bylaw, by adding stories on top of the heritage building, selling public land, ignoring previous parking commitments that were made to the community, and then paying for it again with CIP funds. There should not be double exchanges of subsidy. What can council do? I think council has every right to say no. We have given enough, including land, waiving of bylaws, and ignoring parking commitments. We need the tax money sooner rather than later. In fact, it would be better for us as a city to give the land away and then have access to the funds a lot sooner, because all we're doing is pushing off revenue until 2033 when the money is needed now. And Mr. Mayor, you said today that we have an opioid crisis and a climate crisis and an affordable housing crisis and a large infrastructure deficit, but this proposal does nothing for any of them. I think it's frustrating, to say the least. I don't think there is a legal barrier to you saying no. There is probably a nagging feeling of moral responsibility on the part of those who encourage this application, who feel a bit sheepish about having already passed CIP for the adjacent property. But that should not be the driver. I think the city has to look in the future at putting set points or thresholds in on rent levels, unit pricing, so this problem does not arise again in future. $1 million condos is not what CIP was intended to support. If you look at the inflation that's happened on this site over the last several years, it's probably added $40 million in value. And personally, I'm tired of people making money without adding value. The program is in many ways too inflexible. Neither on the inputs or the outputs are scalable. And it's unfortunate. It's in an all or nothing program. And I would ask council to vote no.
Thank you, Mr. Bikos. The next speaker is Mr. Ed Smith. Welcome, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Senzik. My microphone is working?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, councilors, as usual, all the protocols of this chamber are respected. I haven't really prepared much in the way of speaking to this item because I'm not going to delude myself into thinking that my words can be of any major consequence in the decision that's going to be made tonight. But I do feel compelled to go on the public record voicing my strong opposition to this CIP application. And furthermore, to express my dismay that we're again forced to even consider this project. It was my belief after the last round that the CIP was rewritten to prevent exactly this from occurring. Obviously, I was wrong, and here we are again discussing millions of local taxpayer dollars for luxury waterfront condos. I did some searching for the right words to describe this. Corporate welfare doesn't fit, pork barrel doesn't fit. In the end, this decision comes down to what is the right thing to do and what is wrong. If this were to be approved, it would be wrong. My tax dollars should not be used to subsidize housing for the top 1%. And our local policies should never be designed to allow it. My understood intent of the CIP was to prevent this type of application from being possible. CIP should only be used to address issues of community benefits, whatever they may be. This is not such a case. I have a stronger sense now for what's happened and how we got here. And I believe it's something that must be talked about very publicly in the future. I'm hopeful that council will do the right thing tonight, but I also think it's very important that one of you please consider requesting a recorded vote on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And Mr. Don Sawyer is next.
Thank you, Mayor. I only learned last night that the proposal was in front of council again. And of course, I was surprised to say the least, since it had been defeated twice already by council. So I'm assuming that this is coming, the current report is coming through as a result of the new CIP, which I was involved with from the beginning. So I think we need to put a bit in that new 2020 CIP context, because at those meetings, it was pretty clear that there was a fierce desire that future CIP grants be used only to incentivize development of greatest benefit to the community. And I really believe that the new CIP program would do exactly that and would ensure that taxpayers' money would never again be used to provide developers of upscale condos on some of the most desirable development land in Ontario with public monies. And I was so convinced of this that in November, I attended the council meeting where I publicly supported the plan. And in fact, I said this, I said, I want to congratulate staff on a comprehensive document that represents real improvements over the 2015 iteration and incorporates many of the concerns discussed at the December public information meeting, especially a focus on affordable housing, movement away from the size of project as determining approval criterion, and focus on brownfield remediation. And I went on to say, and this is actually from the report that accompanied the November meeting, I think these improvements are summarized in the statement on page 11 of the summary. The changes to the scoring criteria have resulted in an eligibility requirement that should disqualify most projects that do not have significant costs related particularly to environmental remediation, heritage restoration and conservation, mixed use or affordable housing. And the 2004 CIP and the 2015 CIPs encourage, quote, development, while the 2020 CIP is encouraging specific priority types and scales of development. I believed that. I took that for granted, and and that's why I supported it, because I believed it. I believe in the concept of CIPs, but I think that the staff's recommendation of this proposal to the council is frankly a betrayal of what CIPs are and how they should be used, and also a betrayal of the public process that preceded that document, where so many people spent so much time discussing this issue. So let's make one thing clear here. This proposal, if it's passed, is not an incentive, it's a gift. CIP incentives are designed to encourage development critical to the community by sharing risk and absorbing potential profit losses. The Harbor Club residences need neither. The units start at $900,000 and are reportedly 90% sold. The property, which was purchased, reported for $6 million, is appreciated just sitting there by 40 or 50%. Mr. Rosen is an experienced developer, and he purchased the property.
Can you stick to the report, Mr.
I am. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for reminding me, and I'll do exactly that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Rosen is an experienced developer, and he purchased the property with a business plan that did not assume a $350,000 a year tax rebate. The only thing this is going to incentivize is future developers arriving with their hands out.
Can you stick to the report, please?
Their project benefits
stick to the report, Mr. Sawyer.
In fact, if this application is approved,
Mr. Sawyer, can you stick to the report?
Mayor, would you please allow me to finish?
Not if you don't stick to the report.
I am sticking to the report.
No, you're not.
The CIP is the background to the report.
No, it's not.
In fact, if this application is approved, it's hard to imagine what project would not qualify for a CIP grant. And even a brief glance at the evaluation of the project, which is on page 1829 of your agenda, shows the absurdity of the application. In the revised 2020 CIP adopted by Council, the Planning Department writes, as directed by Council on March 18, 2019, we've completed a review of the 2015 CIP with an emphasis on the following 4 areas: affordable housing, remediation of contaminated lands, heritage conservation and restoration, and mixed-use development. So you have to then look at how those issues conform to the proposal. And that's contained, again, that particular, on page 129 of your agenda, that scoring chart is available to you. So the project is awarded no points for redevelopment since it's not in a priority neighborhood. It gets 4 points for remediation, which is the lowest possible score, and only twice what they're provided for
your time's up, Mr.
additional
Sawyer.
parking
So if
spaces.
you could just wrap up.
I am. And the core housing also gets 0 points. So in those 3 critical areas, it gets 4 points. If you add in conservation and mixed use scores, the whole thing comes to about 20 points. To make the 50-point threshold, the applicant is awarded maximum points for the size of the project and the property tax increase once the development is completed. An increase in tax
Okay, if you
revenue
could wrap
that will
up, Mr. Sawyer.
accrue to the city, whether or not it gets the developer $3.5 million of taxpayers' money or not. Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Okay, now we'll have questions of the presenters. We have the 4 presenters who were speaking to this report. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. I guess I guess it's a question for all of them, or should I single out?
Depending on who spoke to what.
Okay, I guess I'll ask Mr. Dank. With regards to this particular application not having core housing component, if it had a core housing component and had scored points for that, would you be in support of the application being approved by council?
Hello?
Mr. Denk, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Hello?
Yep, you can speak.
He may not have heard the question, I don't know.
Mr. Denk, did you hear the question?
I'll redirect that question to Mr. Beekhouse. I think their points were generally coming from the same point of view, so I'd appreciate hearing from Mr. Beekhouse as well.
Mr. Beekhouse?
Could you give me the question again, please?
Yeah, the question was with regards to the specific proposal not having core housing element and not scoring points for core housing element. If it did have those points, would you be comfortable with a council approving the application?
I mean, obviously, the core housing is something which would help the proposal, but I still have too many issues with it. I think that what the problem that we're dealing with is that with the regional matching, we're talking about $7 million. And given all the different things that are going on in this city, that to me, for a project that really doesn't need it, is just a waste of money.
Hello?
Councillor Miller, you want to?
Yeah, I guess Mr. Dinks.
Councillor Miller, yeah, I'm here. May I answer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Listen, I heard you speaking with respect to development charges, as I did hear other councilors. The gist of it was that not only the gist, but the actual quote was, developers should pay for development. And I agree with you on that. This project is also apparently going to be exempt from development charges in that we've been talking about it for years, and anything under 5 years.
Mr. Dank, we're not talking about development charges, we're talking about affordability. So if you can keep to the subject matter at hand, it'd be greatly appreciated.
Okay, it's hard to talk about affordability when we're talking about this project, obviously. There's an inherent defect in a starting price of $900,000. This project's got nothing to do with affordability. It's about putting money in an individual's pocket with little or no public benefit. All the things you spoke about at the opening of this meeting are pressing our community, and it's immoral to suggest that the taxpayers' money should be applied to something that neither needs it and only scarcely meets the criteria when it was scored in a completely unfair fashion.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dank.
Okay, and I guess a question to all four of the presenters and would be, Mr. Bekas raised the issue of scalability, and I think that's an issue I have with this project as well, and I think others do, the sheer amount of the tax rebate that it's receiving based on what the project is and what it's adding to the community. I'm curious, of the four presenters, would they be more in favor of approving a CIP for this project if that total estimated amount of the rebate was lower?
Okay, you want to, Mr. Sawyer, do you want to take a run at this one first?
You know, Greg, to me, it's not a matter of how much money. This isn't what a CIP is meant for. CIPs, we used to say, are to be used surgically for very specific purposes, particularly to deal with intractable issues or in developments that developers wouldn't normally go into. And this is not surgery. This is, if anything, maybe it's cosmetic surgery, but it is not being used in a way that addresses the fundamental needs of the community. So to me, I think it's great that Mr. Rosen is developing this. He's already sold out 90%, terrific, but we do not need to give him $350,000 a year for 10 years.
Mr. Smith, do you want to come in, or?
Yeah, I think I can only echo what was just said. In my mind, it's not the dollar amount, it's the intent of a CIP. And my understood intent, and I believe my understood intent is, I'm gonna step out and take a risk here, and I don't like speaking for the community, but I believe that I'm speaking for a great percentage of taxpayers who do not support their tax dollars going towards something like this. CIPs are about community benefits, and as Don Sawyer just said, surgical application. And I would say that we even heard in a staff report earlier tonight on this, that it got environmental points for diverting rubble that would have gone to a landfill. The building is a heritage structure. It's hard to imagine that it would ever end up in a landfill. It seems to me the scoring was done heavily slanted in one direction, and no dollar amount can make this right.
Okay,
There
thank
is
you, Mr. Smith.
something going wrong here. Thank
Okay,
you.
Councillor Townsend, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenters, thank you for your presentations tonight. My question is in regards to the remediation and the contamination on the site. I know that I did hear through some of you that you don't believe there is a lot of contamination. It says in the application that there's less than 3%, but that's only early on in the process. Does the city or municipality, do you feel, play any role in helping assist with the cleanup of the contaminated site?
If I could just speak to that. I absolutely feel that they do. And I think we have some serious brownfield situations in this community that are going to require a great deal of CIP. And I mean, I obviously you're well aware of our work on the GM site. So to me, I mean, I suspect there is some small amount of it. I think to call that old cotton mill a brownfield is a bit of a stretch. A brownfield covers 55 acres of old industrial land filled with over 40.
So we stay on the subject matter, please.
Well, I think that is this matter, isn't it? I mean, so yeah, I do think the city has a responsibility, but this isn't it.
Okay.
I think we need to redirect that money to some real brownfield redevelopment in the city.
Okay, Councillor Townsend.
To Mr. Smith, the same question.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, thank you. I would actually say no, the city has no responsibility for, no more responsibility than the city has if a gas station owner finds out that his subterranean gas tank is leaking and therefore needs to be remediated or cleaned up. The property owner is responsible. Where the city has responsibility, I would say, is if there was a human health issue associated with this site, if the contamination was such that it was threatening the population or the environment, then absolutely the city needs to be involved in getting the right resources into place. But a cash award to a site that's going to be done anyway is not the solution.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the presenters. I think Councillor Miller has asked some of the questions that I had, but I just wanted to ask, I think, Mr. Sawyer specifically, he mentioned, can everybody hear me okay, by the way? I'm not. He mentioned how he had been involved with the public meetings and so on CIP in developing the new program, and of course we all were as well. You mentioned that the CIP new plan was supposed to focus on certain priorities. Would you say that one of the key priorities, if not the most important one, was affordable housing?
I don't think there's any question. And I think that also came out when the plan itself was presented in November. And I mean, this came out over and over again. At one of the meetings that we had, people talked all about what kind of affordable housing could it could be cooperative housing? What kind of, you know, there was real interest in that issue and real brainstorming about how we could contribute through the CIP to the development of affordable housing. And to me, that was the primary focus of every single session I attended. And to see a project like this being recommended without a single point in that area seems to me to be pretty incomprehensible.
Thank you. And a question, I don't know, perhaps to Mr. Beekes. One of you mentioned the fact that the real estate market has been booming, and obviously that property has appreciated an awful lot. Does anybody know when the developer purchased that property? I'm trying to remember how many years ago it was.
I don't think they have that answer. I think you can ask that answer of Mr. Hall when he comes up.
Okay, okay. But, I mean, no question, as you've all mentioned, that our real estate market is booming, and that's why we have such an affordable housing crisis on top of everything else. But The other question was, I think some of you mentioned that the project is sold out. That's what I have heard as well. Is that what you have all heard?
So again, you can ask that of Mr. Hall when he comes
Okay.
up, because I don't want to deal with speculation, which we've heard some of that
Okay.
tonight. I'd rather get the
Okay.
facts.
And, okay. Thank you very much. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to maybe Mr. Bekas, on the final page of the report, if you look at the scoring, there's a note that says $1.3 million of project costs is for remediation. I think that I heard you suggest that the site owner contaminated the land themselves. There was also discussion about the fact that there wasn't much contamination. I'm just wondering, when we talk about public benefits, what should happen to a site that requires $1.3 million of remediation, if not tax increment financing? I know some members who are of coalition who've presented have asked the city to clean up other sites. So where should that money come from? How should a municipality move forward if you don't believe it should be through tax increment financing? And what do you consider major remediation and minor remediation?
Let me address that with 3 points, I think. The first is that part of this remediation is tearing down existing additions. Those are choices that a developer makes, and may or may not be necessary. I think so if it's not a brownfield if it's just a building standing there. It's not a building standing there is not a brownfield. A brownfield has to have stuff in the ground that is really toxic to the environment or not good for the community. I think one of the things that I have said before, but that is that these types of things are supposed to be built into the price you pay. So if you're looking at a property, you do your due diligence and you drill holes and you get engineers out there and you say, hey, this is what it is. You don't then transfer all those costs to the city. So it should be in the price. The third point I would make is that historically, this has not been. I mean, it was a factory, but it was not a dirty factory. It was a they were making Kevlar vests. It was a cotton mill, right? So, and the property adjacent to it, it didn't have anything on it. It was a water spillway historically, and another building that was on it was used for years for the rowing club to store rowing shells. So it's not as if there's been heavy industry there and there's PCBs in the ground and all kinds of chemicals and things like that. I don't see that as being worthy of that much remediation. I suspect any site that you come to, I've been in construction, any site you come to, you have to clear it, right? Whether it's taking up paving or whether it's you take a bulldozer and you clear the site. Every site has that. That's nothing novel. So I guess that's how he gets to 1.3 million. I don't know what the specifics of that is. It's not in the report necessarily.
Thank you, Mr. Begas. I did read the record of site condition from 57 Lakeport Road, which is right next door, and there was significant contamination, and they claimed that part of it did come from the adjacent property. I just want to point that out, and it's really up to the Ministry of Environment to determine what is a brownfield. It's it can't be up to our opinions. I just wanted to throw that out there. The next question I have is, I did read the Port Reporter, which I enjoy reading when it comes out, so thank you very much. There's an article in here called, the title is, "Do We Really Need These Old Buildings?" And it was an article written in response to the fire at the Welland House Hotel, which I think the entire community was devastated by witnessing the loss of that building, and also the fact that it had been left vacant for a long time, partially exposed to the elements. In this article, it does say, there are many examples of cities and towns that have made the effort to protect their architectural heritage and other tax and other incentives to developers and owners to adopt the preservation, restoration, and adaptive reuse of these precious buildings. And then it talks about what some cities do, and there's the tax incentives. So are you in agreement that there should be some sort of program in the city of St. Catharines for adaptive reuse of heritage buildings and for heritage preservation? Do we need some kind of grant programs to protect our built heritage? Do we need grant programs to encourage adaptive reuse of heritage buildings, which keeps building materials out of landfills and consumes or saves much energy from the construction process?
Well, I will say two things about that. One is that I think that the mayor has asked us to stay on task with respect to the report. But the second thing that I was happy with the fact that the heritage was added to the CIP program. The problem that I have with this particular site is the fact that only half of the program is heritage, and the other half is brand new construction. So if you apply that principle broadly into other potential heritage sites, you're going to be paying if you can attach a brand new site to a small heritage component, then the entire site qualifies, and I think that's dangerous.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. And just for the public record, the site was the first rubber works factory. And so we do have another rubber works factory that was provided with CIP, and that was in Meriton, at what is now the Keg. That was a rubber works factory. So to claim that that was a clean industry, I think we can all agree at the turn of the century of the 1900s, when that was a rubber factory, I'm sure they weren't following much environmental measures as they would today. So I just wanted that for the public record, and I think for the presenters here today, a rubber factory in the turn of the century would indicate there may be, I'm not saying for sure, but there may be some contamination there. Councillor Williamson, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenters. From your perspective as somewhat outsiders, this is the third go round of this general application process. Is it something new and different than the previous iterations?
Mr. Denk, you want to take a run at that one? Mr. Smith, someone?
Yeah, to me, in my mind, it's no different at all, except to say the surprise or shock that I am feeling that we're even here. I believe the intent when the reconsideration was asked for, what was it, maybe 2 years ago? I think the intent and the public sentiment was clear, and people went forward in good faith and created a new CIP thinking that we had ironed out the issues. And here we are under that, our first case under the new CIP, and we haven't ironed out a single issue. The whole program is broken.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
There needs to be a lot of discussion in the public about this going forward.
Mr. Smith, and thank you. Mr. Sawyer?
Yeah, I would basically, I mean, to me, the disappointment is that this is back in front of us under the new CIP. The only difference is that, as far as I can tell, I've seen the one that was defeated 2 years ago. is that it's coming under a new CIP that we thought would eliminate this kind of project from public funding. But you know, what it consists of, it seems to me, at least in my reading of it, is virtually identical to what we saw originally.
All right, thank you. Councillor Williamson, you're finished?
Yep.
Okay, Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Microphone.
Got to put your microphone on. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working. There we go. Now it's on. Thank you.
Thank you. I had two questions. One was regarding affordable housing, and that's been answered. And the second question I have is with respect to mixed-use development. And the policy states to be eligible for points, it must not have ground floor dwelling units or non-essential residential functions. And when I look at the mixed use receiving 10 points, I question whether that mixed use, which is commercial, is something that Port Dalhousie needs. Because my understanding is that the commercial sector is suffering, and yet it's being proposed that we put some commercial in the development.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe ask staff that question when you have the opportunity.
Or I think the speakers, Mr. Mayor, have some familiarity.
All right, Mr. Denk?
Yes, I'd like to answer that. Look, we have a situation that requires no funding whatsoever. We can dance around the particular parameters. We can talk about the less than 3% of environmental remediation. We can talk about whose responsibility, whether it's the property owner or the city. Mr. Smith is very correct in saying that since there is no danger to the public, then there should be no public participation in the remediation. Likewise, with respect to mixed use, I'll tell you what, there's going to be a big mess in Port Dalhousie. Next, we're going to be taking away Rennie Park for parking because there's nothing left. It's a very small
That's
area.
not part of the discussion that we're having, and I don't think you'll lose Rennie Park to parking.
Well, I hope you're right, because it was previously proposed, as you're well aware. In any case, this needs to be defeated on this project. I am not opposed to CIP. The needs that you addressed, Mr. Mayor, at the beginning of this meeting, the opioid crisis, the affordable housing, this and that, the list goes on. They need to be addressed by money, and money requires taxpayers paying. And furthermore, not only should they pay, as is in the case here, they should not be rebated their money, or in this case, 80% of it. We need that money. We are in a budget shortfall, and we're discussing giving away millions of dollars to an individual private investor of $900,000 condos. That is the core issue we're discussing. And please let's not drift off on tiny little details, as so many councilors have tried to do. Listen, we're all struggling out here. The people that are working for a living are working to pay our taxes, which are not low, especially in the Port Dalhousie district, as everyone is aware. We cannot throw away money. Just raise the price of the condos a little bit more and let the people that buy the condos pay the price. That is the correct distribution of cost. All this other business is nonsense. I can't believe it has been rammed through yet again by commercial interests, both in and out of government. It's really to a working taxpayer. It's an abomination. It really is.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, perhaps I didn't ask my question clearly, but the allocation of 10 marks for mixed-use component, and I'm asking those who live in Port that do they consider the commercial component to be critical to the revitalization of Port, because I do find that we need more residential accommodation, but I'm not sure on the commercial. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Mr. Mayor, I can speak to that if you wish.
Yeah, you're up.
Okay, great. Yeah, I do live in Port Dalhousie, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to speak to the need for commercial, but I do know that we have our commercial core is still struggling. As a citizen volunteer, I work in this commercial core just on beautification issues and trying to bring people into the commercial core through the use of the stage that has been built there, etc. There are problems in the Port Dalhousie commercial core. I'm not an economist, I'm not a businessman. I don't know if the solution to the problem is building more commercial space, but I know we have so many empty strip malls. I'm amazed every time I see another strip mall opening up somewhere. I guess that's the best answer I can give to that.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thank you, Councillor.
Could
Okay,
I
seeing no more.
respond to that as well?
Pardon me?
I said, could I respond to that as well?
Yes, you may.
Thank you. I don't think we need it. I think it is put there partly to make a mixed use component, and it's also very inaccessible in the sense that it's off in a residential corner. And I don't think that if you put a Starbucks in there, for example, it's not going to get anywhere, because there's really no parking attributed to it. It's in a hidden corner. And I think we're dealing with a lot of the commercial stuff that's going on in Port right now, and there is a lot of space coming as well. Further up, especially with the new Rankin proposal. So I think we're going to have enough space, and I don't think the space in that building is necessary or appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Bekas. Okay, thank you, Councillor. Thank you for the questions. We're going to move on to the next speaker. Oh, Councillor Harris, you have your hand up.
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, to all the speakers. I've heard a lot of you say, we think, and mentioned about the brownfield. What qualifications do each one of you have to make comments on if it's the brownfield or not, or the retail space or commercial space? I'm just wondering.
Mr. Scheuer? You got on mute, sorry.
I'd like to join in when there's a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, it's a provocative question. It's a rhetorical question, obviously. And it's designed to denigrate the.
I don't think it's actually not.
I think that's the way I feel. Because I think as has been clearly said, we don't have any documentation. But that's the owner's, that's the builder's responsibility, has been said before. Any responsible builder will do a site assessment in terms of environmental remediation before they buy it. My guess is that it has been done, and has also been already commented by earlier that some of this seems to be in areas of add-ons that are actually being torn down. I don't know what the situation is. I suspect you don't either, Councillor Harris. I suspect, but that's really not the issue. Who did come up with that estimate? Do we know? I don't know. And what is it based on? It was a responsible environmental assessment organization that went in and determined that amount? I don't know. But that's the kind of thing that you need to be looking at. How did they arrive at? Is it justified? I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sawyer.
May I speak quickly on that?
Yes, you may. Is this Mr. Denk?
Yes, it is, sir.
Okay.
Okay, listen. None of the councillors have qualifications with respect to the question asked. But we are responding to the proposal. And in the proposal, it's less than 3%. That being the case, our qualifications are not the question, Councillor Harris. it is the very proposal that we are discussing that defines the question. And less than 3% is not justify the kind of money that you are proposing that we hand out to this entity. Let them raise the prices of the condos. Let the people who get the condos pay for the remediation. They know they're in a heritage building. They know there might be less than 3% of the cost for remediation. Let them pay less than 3%. They're the segment of our society that is most qualified to pay that less than 3%. And I've got to say, it's a little bit insulting, the kind of picayunish manner in which this question is trying to be maintained.
You know what I find kind of insulting is the comments relating to staff, and we have to look into this and make sure it's a recorded vote. We're trying our best. We're relying on staff to give us an informed decision. So, like, I don't really appreciate the way you're talking to me either. I just wanted to know what your qualifications were, because all four of you have made comments about real estate, have made comments about brownfield, and I just wondered what makes you qualified to give your opinion.
Well, I agree with you. None of us are, including yourself. And if you're insulted by that, I take the same criticism.
I don't claim to be. I don't claim to be. I listen to staff.
Nor do I.
And read everything.
We can't have a debate amongst the staff and council. I mean, not staff,
yes, sir.
the speakers and council.
Yes, sir. I quite agree. But with respect to real estate values, we all know the truth of that matter, and trying to throw that in, it's called a red herring in debate.
Okay, Mr. Dank, we're done. So I'll move over, and Mr. Smith, you have a comment. You took your video on and off. I don't know if you have a comment or if you want to leave this one alone.
Actually, Mr. Mayor, I don't think I have anything productive to add to this discussion.
I appreciate that. Okay, seeing no other questions, we're going to go now to the next speaker, Mr. Bruce Hall. Mr. Bruce Hall, you'll be speaking next. And again, you got 5 minutes, and stay to the report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can everybody hear me clearly?
You are being heard clearly, yep.
Thank you. My name is Bruce Hall. I'm a planning consultant on behalf of the applicant. I'm here to speak to you tonight about this application for the brownfield tax, the BTIF program under the city's community improvement plan, for 57A, 61, and 63 Lakeport. As you are aware, the zoning for this project was approved by council in August 2018, and the applicant has continued to work their way through the complexities and the number of complexities of this project, which combines heritage and brownfield and a number of other elements through the site plan approval process, as well as the acquisition of the portion of the former DFO lands with strong assistance and support in a collaborative way with your staff, who are very professional and very objective and really want to see the objectives of the CIP implemented. As you are also aware, St. Catharines has had a CIP in place since 2004, and during that period has approved about 100 CIP applications, including the Port Royal next door. And they have contributed to many successes, representing the creation of over 2,000 dwelling units, 300 permanent jobs, and close to $400 million of additional assessment, all because of those CIP applications. The original CIP was reviewed and revised in 2015, and again in 2019, and council directed staff to pause and review the 2015 CIP. Council gave specific direction to staff during the review to study and place a greater emphasis of the new CIP on 4 primary focus areas as follows: affordable housing, remediation of contaminated or brownfield lands, heritage conservation and restoration, mixed-use development. The CIP does not rank, prioritize, or say that all these things have to be achieved. It's a menu, And the more that a project achieves these objectives, the better. The CIP was approved as it exists in its current form in November 2020. To date, we have 2 projects that have been submitted under the new CIP BTIF program. This one, because of the scale of the grant, requires council approval. Fundamentally, the purpose of the CIP is to offer financial incentives to the private sector in order to stimulate investment in projects that support local community renewal objectives and strategies, mainly to increase assessment, create new jobs, to meet the other broad objectives outlined. Excuse me. The CIP program and the ability of this project to access those funds has been a fundamental assumption on this project since day one. As a matter of fact, the incentives offered by the City of St. Catharines in 2017 through the 2015 CIP at the time, as well as there not being any development charges and the city having very low development application fees, were fundamental in the decision to move forward on this project, to come to St. Catharines in the first place, and then in undertaking their due diligence and finally making the decision to do this project. It was the city's obvious open for business view and approach that made the difference for this project being started in the first place. Developers look for certainty, and the CIP that was in place at the time was one element of that certainty. I have personally been involved in this project from almost day one. It's been a pleasure working in a very collaborative way with the various city staff, the region, the Heritage Advisory Committee, the Heritage Permits Advisory Committee, and all the agencies such as the NPCA. Tonight, the approval before you represents one more critically important step to this significant and critically important project. We have reviewed the staff report dated September 9th, which notes the project meets and actually exceeds all eligibility criteria, and the staff report and recommended approval of the CIP application for the project. I'm sorry.
That's about the 5-minute mark.
That was my timer.
Someone's probably calling you to say 5 minutes, you're up.
You have a very comprehensive report from staff which outlines and objectively evaluates the application, so I'm not going to repeat what staff has said. I'm going to simply touch upon each one of the key elements. Remediation of contaminated lands and brownfield sites is one of the 4 focus areas. The city wishes to see these types of lands cleaned up for obvious reasons and have them revitalized and contribute to the ongoing evolution of the city. This is very important. The site is contaminated. It is a brownfield site. The estimates that were given are conservative estimates. You don't know till you get in the ground and start opening up what you actually have. Remediation and heritage projects are 2 of the most unpredictable projects that any developer faces.
Okay, Mr. Hall, so you're at the 5-minute mark. Can I give you 30 seconds and then?
Sure.
Yeah, and then questions.
So in short, the heritage conservation, the cleanup, the mixed use elements, we believe that together the CIP and the project achieve those important objectives of the CIP. Overall, the primary intent of the CIP is to create incentives for new development, increase investment, property assessment, tax base, and achieve other planning objectives. This substantial development, with an overestimated cost of $65 million, will have a measurable effect at many levels with significant positive local and regional impacts in terms of temporary and long-term job creation, consumer spending. Will add over $70 million of new assessment to the city's tax base, generating both net new taxes, both during the period of this grant and afterwards. In terms of other objectives, the project will also add value in terms of enhanced sustainability related to site and landscape design, building and suite design, and active transportation.
Okay.
I thank you for the opportunity to present this information to you and look forward to applying a consistent and fair approach to this application as you have with others.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And I'll take questions. Councillor Townsend, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Hall. My question to you is, in your application under the remediation, you guys have, your team has put less than 3%. I mean, there's a very good chance that this could cost, you have it here at 1.3, but there's a good chance that the contamination on this site could cost significantly more. And I mention that because the site next door where they did not believe there'd be a lot of contamination, there was. Why did you guys, why did your team factor such a low amount for cleanup of the contamination?
Well, it was prepared by, thank you very much, and through you, Mr. Mayor, it was prepared by a team of experts, and, you know, given the information that they had available to them at the time, that's the number that was provided based upon a number of inputs. When people talk about 3%, I mean, this is a very, very large project at $65 million. So, you know, it's probably one of the largest projects that St. Catharines and Port Dalhousie has seen for a long time, if ever. So, you know, 3% is the low end of a range, but it represents a very sizable component. You are very correct. That could just be a drop in the bucket. But, you know, we wanted to put a number that they felt was they were comfortable with, that at the time was proven. If it proves to be more, we still met the criteria, and we didn't just want to put inflated numbers in.
Okay, thank you for that. I guess I know you're saying that you, through the mayor, you're saying that you had experts, but all you need to do is essentially look down the road to our friends in the neighboring community of Hamilton, where they have been revitalizing their harbor front, where they had buildings being put up where they estimated it to be, you know, 3%, and it ended up costing them 25, 30. The reef site ended up costing them 138.9 million to clean that up. So this is a big risk that you're taking based on the amount that you've given. Are you concerned that when you start unveiling and you know, digging on the site that you could come across some severe contamination, which is quite likely?
It is a legitimate concern. I think one of the things that happens when you do cleanup, as you're doing construction and doing excavation and shoring and forming, is there's a bit of an offset in terms of that cost, because you're going down and you're doing it anyways. If you were to sit and do that on its own, well in advance of any of that happening, it would have a much higher cost. But there's a certain component of that things that you're doing anyways, but the real cost of it is much higher. Sorry, that was my timer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Miller?
Thank you, and thanks, Mr. Hall, for your presentation. I do have to say, just preface this, I suppose, because it's important to the question, that though it is a menu, it is ranked, what we're looking for, obviously, through the point system, in terms of how the project's evaluated. You know, for example, the tax increase at the site staff decided and council agreed was more important than affordable housing. It's worth more points in that menu. Again, against my wishes, I would note that. But if there was no CIP, if I can ask you as the planner to speculate, if there was no CIP at all, there's no program in St. Catharines, how different would this site plan look, or the proposal for the site look?
I may have to defer that question to one of the principals of the owner. I can't really speculate, but, you know, as I said, part of it is decisions are made on developments very early on in the process, and developers look for certainty and consistency. They make assumptions, and they look for a sense of fairness and equity in terms of how all development applications are treated, you know, through that CIP process. So it goes back, you know, the speculation about whether the project would or wouldn't happen. We're really focusing on something that was a critical part of the decision making and the financial analysis of this project right from the beginning. The comments that come in about, oh well, you know, the cost of real estate has risen, the units have risen. A lot of these units were sold, you know, 2 years ago at prices that reflected the prices then. And so it's just not, it doesn't take up all the difference in that. At the same time that the real estate market has risen, construction prices have risen, material prices have risen. The developers have fixed costs based upon some of the decisions made earlier. then those other costs are rising. And even the delays in the project that have been, there's been a number of delays that are a result of a variety of factors, some related to things beyond our control, some are within our control. That, the biggest single cost for any project is financing, and financing is a huge burden when things happen over a very long period of time. And the client went very willingly down the road with combining the DFO lands and to make a better project in terms of the parkland and everything. But that, much to the chagrin of all the city staff here, we worked really hard to make that happen. It added a significant amount of time to the project and a very significant cost that was never accommodated or planned for in the beginning. And that will take away some of the increase in the real estate price.
Just as a follow-up, I suppose, I think the purpose of the CIP could be boiled down to incentivizing developments that wouldn't otherwise happen, or modifying them in such a way that they wouldn't happen. This is something even the Home Builders Association agreed with. I guess, could you, in your professional opinion, would this development happen in the way it's happening without a CIP program?
Again, I really, as a consultant, I can't make a comment about whether it will not happen, or how it might happen, or how it might change. I'm going to have to defer that to somebody else. But again, it's that the project happened to begin with because of the CIP, because of the development charges, because of the low fees and the open for business attitude. That was the impetus for coming to St. Catharines and doing this project from the beginning.
Okay, is Mr. Falco, just wouldn't mind getting this resolved. If Mr. Falco is available, I'll look to Evan and see if he's on. If not, then Mr. Falco, I believe you're one of the partners, if not on the financial side. And if Mr. Rosen also wants to speak, but
I'm available. It's Lou Falco.
Okay, Mr. Falco, do you want to respond to Councillor Miller?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council for hearing this out. To be clear, when we purchased the property, we definitely, as Mr. Hall had suggested, looked at all factors, and we did have to. The environmental assessment was part of the original look and concerns of the project, not just the environment, but the heritage aspects of the building, the closeness and proximity to the water. And that was a big concern. And certainly we were told by the real estate people at the time, and we looked into the programs that were available and thought that would provide some cushion. And that has been definitely one of the factors in moving forward for us.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Falco. Okay, Councillor Littleton, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to Mr. Hall. We heard from the other presenters. There was some questions about, I guess, buyer beware, really around this idea that you buy what if you had done your due diligence, X, Y, and Z would have happened. So I'm just wondering, when you're looking at a property such as this, are you able to go on and start drilling holes on the property to start and taking a look at those preliminary environmental concerns?
Yeah, certainly that's part of any reasonable developer's due diligence, and I certainly recommend it. It's kind of a snapshot, if you like, of testing some holes and seeing what generally happens at a number of locations over the site, and then extrapolating that and making some assumptions. So there is buyer beware, but I think the buyer beware part of it was also has to be reconciled with. They looked at the cost. They looked at some evaluation of the costs, and as Luke said, Mr. Falco said, they looked at the programs that were available, legitimately available to any developer at the time, and that some of those costs and the risks and the potential upside or downside, if you like, was buffered or offset by those available programs.
And so when you were looking at those holes and what have you, you felt that while there was probably, I mean, I'm putting words in your mouth, but regardless, there was whatever you found was going to be remediated as part of your plans, but that you still believed in the project, that it could move forward, that you had done all of that homework. I'm just clarifying.
Yeah, I'm through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking for other consultants who did a lot better in science than me in high school, but university. But you know, they looked at it. They said, "Here's the potential risks. Here's the potential costs." The developer took that back, looked at all the other costs of the land and the construction, the CIPs that were available, and said, "This is a reasonable risk. We're looking forward to certainty in those costs to help buffer or offset." They brought us to St. Catharines, and we're moving forward on that basis.
And when you have reports made for you, these are, one of the presenters had mentioned that he wasn't sure, who had written this and who had done that. When you are working on such reports that tell you about contamination, for example, these are by qualified PNG and environmental people who have lots of letters behind their name, I'm assuming. Would that be correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Littleton. I had Councillor Kushner and then Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I have is when you look at the incentive, you're talking about over 10 years, 3.5 million. And the question I have, if you did not receive that from the city, what would you have to increase the price of the condos to recover that 3.5 million? I've done a quick calculation and it's under 40,000 per unit. Is that correct?
So, Mr. Hall, over to you, or we'll go to Mr. Falco, because I think some of the calculations aren't considering the units that have been sold currently.
I'm going to defer to Mr. Falco. I mean, the automatic assumption is that you don't increase prices because you have other controls on units that you've sold, and you counted on selling them for X and doing Y, and the availability for programs that would contribute Z.
Okay, so Mr. Falco, do you want to jump in or no?
Okay, now I can do that. Let me just turn on the video here. Again, I think that the point is, I guess a lot of the ship has sailed. We were about 66% sold out over a year ago. So those prices were, pretty well fixed from 2019. And more recently, this past year, January through maybe March, April, when we put a hold on selling, another 14% were sold. We're up at about 80%. So the ability we've lost the ability to pass on any increases in costs, whether they be remediation related, contamination, heritage, or even construction cost related. So there'd be an opportunity, possibly depending on the market, to increase prices on remaining units, but that's even an unknown because you really don't know where that market's going to be, say, 2 years from now on a selling side. So it is we do have a lock-in on the sales side, and unfortunately the costs are rising. So there is a margin squeeze that does go on. So yes, to answer the question, no, we're not able to absorb necessarily just through a $40,000 unit price increase.
Councillor Kushner.
Okay, and a follow-up question, when you considered the price that you would be selling for, did you not consider the risk probability of not receiving the money and therefore adjusted your price upward at that time to compensate for the probability of risk?
Well, not all things can be just passed on through prices. I think our prices were set 2 years ago more in conjunction with what was happening in the current marketplace, neighboring properties that were being sold. Certainly, we're competing into some of the properties in Grimsby and other areas as well. So I think it was more of a competitive analysis as to what could we get. So sometimes it's unfortunate you can't always pass along costs in the marketplace. I know that the market's a little bit different today than it was 2 or 3 years ago. However, prices were set more on a competitive basis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just Councillor Garcia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to either presenter, comments have been made about the project being sold, and you both said that units were sold some time ago, so you can't adjust the price. But when I looked at your website, it says that you're going to be releasing the next package or the next tranche of condos yet. So obviously some of them are being held back, on which you could certainly charge a price that more reflects the big price increase. Is that not correct?
I can answer that question. Again, yes, there's certainly maybe the ability on the remaining 20% of the inventory, which is about 25 units, or maybe the ability to pass on increases. Again, but it's a market-driven mechanism as well. We don't know where the market's going to be. Those units were put on hold or taken off the market, particularly to protect, against future increases in costs and changes of the market. It was just the market's been too volatile. So we don't know. We can't predict that we're going to be able to pass those costs along. It's an unknown because it's a market-driven pricing, not just our costs went up by 50,000. Let's pass it along. It's market-driven.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Mayor, just to comment on something Mr. Hull said that maybe he can comment on, but he did say that the project was based on the assumption that they would get the CIP. I must say I found that really odd. Like, I've been involved in planning a lot of big projects, and we're always advised never count on anything that requires government approval or government discussion. If you get it, great, but it's not in the bag.
So I guess the question, Mr. Hall, is when you approach staff, and what were you told about the eligibility and the potential success rate of the CIP as it had previously existed? Because I think that would be something that staff would share with any developer who's coming forward on a CIP application. So what were you informed of at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I concur. There's no guarantee. It was an element that was taken into account for the pro forma. Certainly when we started to look at what had been through the program, a fairly high rate of approval. Many projects that met the criteria were approved. There was probably a very, very small percentage that were not approved for a variety of reasons. I can't detail all of them, but certainly it was a consideration was given to that. There's a fairly high rate of approval of applications that meet the criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. It goes to Councillor Kushner's probability rate. If the probability of an application that has come through the city has had a high approval rating, you'd probably build that into your financial modeling just to look at what the numbers would be. But I appreciate the question, Councillor Garcia. Councillor Porter for wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To the proponents, I guess I'll address this to whoever wants to answer it. I looked through the application. We did approve this iteration of the CIP program, and I've been following. I looked back and looked at every application over the years and every iteration of the program. It came out in 2004, and it got changed again in 2015. And it was at the request of the Port Dalhousie Business Association and something called the Port Dalhousie Renaissance Committee. So Councillor Garcia, I believe, was on the Renaissance Committee. Councillor Williamson moved to expand the project to Port Dalhousie. And so staff had no other, I guess, indication than to assume that this was the will of council to expand the program in Port Dalhousie and to see some level of revitalization. And almost every CIP application that was recommended by staff has been approved by council. And we've had several. We had a $4.5 million CIP in my ward on the old Hotel Dieu site. I think that was the single largest CIP on a greenfield site. We have $1 million condos that were approved by previous iterations of council, and some of those council members were here, including 77 Yates Street. And so here we are, and from my understanding, in this council, or in this particular development, the entry-level condos that were first sold started at $400,000. Is that correct? Or about $420,000 condo?
So either to Mr. Falco or Mr. Hall, whoever has the quick answer on this.
I can answer quickly. You're close to correct. The starting price of some of the smaller units were in the high 400s, 470, 480 was sort of the starting price 2 years ago. Yes.
Okay. When you came to council last time, I believe that I talked to you about affordable housing, and you do understand the position that council's in. You met the criteria. There is criteria that this council has passed, and sometimes we can't do all things with all projects. It's difficult to remediate a brownfield, do heritage preservation, and add affordable housing. But this is, you heard from the community, and you hopefully you are aware that the median household income in St. Catharines is about $68,000. Maybe in the North End, it's about $80,000. I'm going to ask you on this project, and I know that you have potential future projects in St. Catharines, and bear with me, I'm going to ask you, can you make one of the remaining condos affordable for somebody with a median income in St. Catharines in the North End, which is about $80,000, right? This would mean maybe reducing, I don't know, your down payments, you require 20%. Could you make a condo available for somebody who works in the core in Port Dalhousie or works, say, in the arts field and has a median income of $80,000? Could you, as an act of good faith, do something like that for us? And would you, as an act of good faith, commit to exploring in your future project affordable housing developments? For example, Habitat for Humanity has dozens of projects in the GTA with condo developers. Would you consider exploring some kind of partnership with a not-for-profit or Habitat for Humanity so the people who live in St. Catharines who are struggling to buy a unit could do something like that and get into their first-time home?
Okay, so turn that over to probably Mr. Falco. As Mr. Hall is the consultant, probably can't answer that.
Thank you for your comments there, Councillor Porter. I guess on Port Dalhousie, we do have a limited number of units left, but I would be more than happy to make one of the units that are remaining an affordable unit, however that is going to be defined, whether it's through a subsidized interest rate to have I'd be willing to reduce the mortgage payments to be affordable under the whatever these income guidelines that you brought into play, and certainly we would lower a deposit requirement to say 5% or something like that. I think we'd have more flexibility, as you're aware. 240 Scott Street is kind of coming up the line here for development. I think that's probably an applicable property that we'd love to, Mr. Rosen and ourselves, we'd love to work with the city on finding options for some component of affordable housing or habitat programs. So I'd be more than open to be looking at those sorts of things. I think we've always had that in our mind. However, on Port Dalhousie, I'd be more than happy to, as an act of good faith, put up at least a unit to help with affordability under some program that we can go forward with.
Thank you. We appreciate the difficulty with developing a brownfield site and a site that that I believe has lots of heritage preservation required, and I think there is a bond that's already been paid that is also an act of good faith on the part of the developer that they will be doing the heritage preservation. Affordable housing was just recently implemented into the CIP program. There were several iterations of it. It used to be in the CIP and got taken out back in 2006, and unfortunately it didn't get brought back until this council brought it back in 2019. So we are, we're probably going to bring this up every time there's a CIP application and we don't see affordable housing. We're going to ask why. We get that in this case you may have pre-sold a bunch of units and you have other complicating factors, but this is going to be incredibly important to us and to every developer who's watching. This is what the community needs, and this is what we're looking for. So thanks for answering my questions, and I appreciate that you are going to work to try and at least make a unit affordable in this condo, and hopefully if you move forward on Scott Street, we'll see a really good application and some partnerships with local not-for-profits in the community. That's a great walkable, transit-oriented location near grocery stores and near transit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other further questions, we're going to move on to the next speaker. We have Mr. Tom Rankin. Mr. Rankin can come forward, and welcome. Hello, Mr. Rankin.
Mr. Mayor, members of council.
Yep, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I'm here to speak on behalf of the applicant, Sheldon Rosen. It's kind of unusual. You know, he's really a competitor, but I think fair is fair, and that's the only reason I'm on here speaking. You know, you have a policy in place, CIP. I granted you change the policy, and if he meets the criteria, then I'm flabbergasted that he wouldn't receive the funding. I mean, honorable is honorable. If you've got a policy in place, you've got to respect that policy. So that's the main reason I'm on here, to be fair, and I don't think they're being fair if you turn this down. The other thing I'd like to point out, on our project, the Rankin project, the Royal Port, we did receive funding under this program, and I think it'd be very unfair. I'm the local developer. It's very unfair that if a Toronto developer comes in here and he's not offered the same, you know, in other words, he doesn't get approval for his project when a local contractor or developer does receive. That throws a bad signal to people from outside the area. Don't come into this area because they show favoritism, and there was no favoritism shown, I don't think. I think we met the criteria and that's what we got it, but that's what's going to be, the public is going to be perceived by developers from out of town, that, you know, other town developers aren't respected. So that's the second point I want to make. The third point I want to make is, you know, we talked about the exorbitant prices, but the problem is when you go to market, you've got to pre-sell about 70% before you get financing, and that's usually done a couple of years ahead. And then you're stuck with the price. People flip some of our condos and made big money, but I didn't share in that profit. Actually, you want to know the truth, we barely make, I don't think we met the criteria. The banks have a certain profit they should make, and I don't think, I have to talk to my daughter, I don't think we met the criteria for the profit, because we run into immeasurable problems. For example, the building right next door, the Royal Port, we're delayed 6 months. The price of steel has doubled, and when you get a price for steel, they give you, it's good for 5 days. Price of lumber has doubled. These are the risks you take. So it's not just a matter, you're oversimplifying it when you say you're making this big profit. That is not the truth. And I'd just like to comment on a few other things. They were talking about, I did that job. I was second to Sheldon on the property, and I did a environmental study, and I know it's very costly to do the remediation on that work. It's very rubber, and it goes down deep in the ground. I can tell you that the cost of rehabilitating that property per acre is greater than the General Motors property. And why is the General Motors property not gone ahead? I could be a partner. People have asked me to partner with them because the cost of remediation, which is estimated between $10 and $20 million. So they got this, savings in taxes by this program. The fact of the matter, you've got to put the money out up front. You'd have to spend the 20 million or 10 or 20 million up front. That money's spent by the developer. These are things that we see and we have to take account for them. So in summary, I hear a lot of people talking with, and they're not really, it's not, their conversations not related to facts. I'm in the business. I know the facts. You're not being fair. If you turn them down, you're not being fair to this gentleman. And I haven't talked to Mr. Rosen for over a year. I know just to get out of the ground. I quoted him. I think it was economic. He probably would have went ahead before now. I know my price to him just to get out of the ground was over $10 million. He's got water coming in from the canal. He's got to drive sheep all around it. He's got to water it. He's got to drive piles. I see these, and I think that, I gave him a price a year ago, and he still hasn't gone ahead. So I think it has to be economics. So that's pretty well all I have to say. But I think if you don't approve it, this council is not being fair for an honorable gentleman from out of town. I have nothing to gain by this, nothing whatsoever.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. I appreciate that. You got any questions of council? Councillor Miller.
Thanks, Mr. Rankin. As you probably know, I voted against approving your project as well, so at least I can safely say it didn't have to do with where you lived or where Mr. Rosen lived. But I did have a question about your project, because as it relates to this one, when you were developing your site in Port Dalhousie next door, did you have an assumption within your pro forma, your plan for the site, that CIP would be approved?
I think I'd have to look back, but I think we thought there was a high probability, very high probability that we'd receive this money. So I'd have to say yes.
So do you think your project would not have moved forward, or maybe not move forward in the way it did without CIP?
Well, I'm an honest guy. I can't really say it for sure, but I think it was one of the reasons why we went ahead with the project. There's no question it had an effect on why we went ahead.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Rankin. This is just out of curiosity. The new CIP program that we approved had some changes to it, and I actually don't think your project that we approved before this came out would be approved today, because I think there was no heritage restoration, and it might have lost points in other areas. Do you support in general the direction of Council's CIP, the new program, even though like today, you probably, if your project was applying today, I don't think you would get the points you did last time?
Yeah, I do support it. And because I do support it, you're trying to encourage people to develop this land. How much are you getting? $35,000 a year in taxes? And it's not like a lot of the speakers are talking as if you're taking taxpayers' money. You're just reducing the taxpayer that this building or this development is going to pay. You're not taking it from the general public. The way they were talking, it sounds like you're taking the money from the general public. You're reducing it, but after the 10 years, you might be getting over $1 million a year in taxes. The other thing I was going to say, most of the units we've found that these are elderly people, and with no children for the most part, 50% of the tax dollars goes to the educational system. So you're saving 50%. Because, you know what I mean? In other words, it's a win-win situation. And, you know what I mean? You got to look at both sides of the equation. All the speakers tonight looked at one side of the equation, not both sides.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Rankin, thank you for your delegation tonight. My question to you is, when you purchased your property and your development, did you account for or plan for any type of contamination that was on site? And if you did, was there more or less? Like, how did you prepare your development for contamination on site?
Are you talking about the site that I'm doing, or are you talking about a Sheldon site? Which site?
The site currently that is almost finished, so the old Legion site.
Yes, we did, but there wasn't as much contamination on that site. There was a building on the site, and it wasn't possible to ascertain how much, when the Legion came to me, you know what I mean, I made a decision, right or wrongfully, that I'd give them 6,000 square feet and 2 condo units. I perhaps paid too much, but I made the decision, and I made it, and I'll stick with it. And so I'm happy with the decision I made. The Legion, they're having struggles, and so I thought I was doing a good thing. And I'm sure the contamination. We didn't think there was that much contamination. I don't think there was. There was some, but not as much as this property of Sheldon's.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, seeing no other further questions, just want to say thank you to Mr. Rankin, thank you to Mr. Hall and Mr. Falco, and as well as Mr. Sawyer, Mr. Smith, Mr. Beekes, Mr. Dank for their presentations. Can I have a motion to receive all the presentations? Councillor Kushner, seconded by Councillor Miller. All in favor of receiving all the presentations? That is carried. And now the motion on the floor being moved by Councillor Harris and seconded by Councillor Littleton is the motion of staff that comes from the application, and the motion is in front of us. And now I'll look to a speakers list. Councillor Townsend, you're up for first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff. The cost of contamination has been a big question mark after seeing some of the contamination that was found in the Hamilton developments. I'm wondering, staff have worked with the applicant and have addressed the $1.3 million in remediation. Is it fair to suggest that it could potentially cost the planner, the developer, significantly more to decontaminate this site?
Director Kitte?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, it's possible that the amount to decontaminate or environmentally remediate the property could come in higher than originally forecasted.
I guess, is there a number, like a potential estimate as to how much it could potentially cost to decontaminate? I know it's hard to suggest an exact number, but judging by the size of the property and knowing that it was a former rubber factory, it could cost anywhere from what, 5 to 10 million perhaps? And I'm just going off the cost based on what had happened in Hamilton recently on their harbor front.
Director Kitte?
Through the chair to the councillor, would be inappropriate for me to speculate on the amount that it could be, but yes, it could conceivably change from what was previously forecasted. It is important to note, though, that as per Council's approved community improvement plan policies, the post-development assessment is capped at a 5% variance. So even if the environmental remediation came in substantially higher, the cap is at 5%.
So if it does come in substantially higher, who pays for the additional cost to remediate and clean up the contamination on the site?
Through the chair to the councillor, that would be the applicant.
So the applicant, even though they've only earmarked 1.3 million to clean up the site, they could be spending up to, say, 5 or 10 million, similar to what other factories have paid to clean up, just like this year in Hamilton.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, that's correct.
Thank you. I do have a couple more questions through the mayor. The ownership with this, if council does decide to present and go with this CIP, what happens if there is an ownership change on the property? Does the CIP get transferred into new ownership?
Through the mayor to the councillor, any change for the approval of the CIP would have to be assigned by council.
Okay, thank you for that. In the application that we have before us, we've accounted for points given for bike parking, indoor bike parking, promenade, and a park. I'm interested, the park aspect. I didn't see a park drawn into the original design, and then the bike parking. Is that just basically putting a bike rack in front of the development to give it points?
Through the mayor, maybe I can jump in on this one. So the actual area for the park is where the existing restaurant was. So that is being conveyed to the city, and there will be a sort of park promenade built there. And then some of the sustainability features like the bike parking and all of that is going above and beyond for what we would generally require, and providing it also in some of the public areas. And all of that would be tied down in the site plan approval.
Okay, thank you for that. I've looked a lot at the application that is before us, and I've looked at what other municipalities have done. You look at Oakville, Burlington, Mississauga, Grimsby. Did they give CIPs to assist with waterfront developments? No. But if you zero in and look in at the city of Hamilton, they right now are revitalizing their harbor fronts and on contaminated sites. So I did a little digging, and just out of curiosity to see how much it cost. The Reef Randall cleanup is costing the city of Hamilton $138.9 million. The East Harborfront Pier 8 cost the city $150 million to clean up that site with $16 million of federal money. Are we getting federal and provincial money right now to clean up our sites? I haven't seen any. I certainly haven't. Would be nice to have that, but we're not getting it. It costs $150 million for them to clean up the Shadok River in Hamilton. How are they doing this? They're doing it through partnerships with other developers and builders because they believe in clean harborfront, clean waterfronts. We have a responsibility. This is the big question here at hand is, and I've asked this tonight to some people, is does the city and do municipalities have a responsibility to assist, or what role do they play and helping to maintain and protect their waterfronts, their shorelines, and their harbor fronts? We're not seeing any provincial or federal money. And if we don't see any of this money going forward, who knows how long this is going to take to continue cleaning up our waterfront. When it comes to this application, to be quite frank, the amount, the ask is very concerning to me. It is a lot of money, the 3.5. But when I do look in hindsight, there is a lot of contamination potential for this developer to have to clean up. I'm hoping I can add an amendment into this application process, and I'm hoping it would be friendly. I'm not sure if it will be, but I'm willing to put it on the table in hopes to find a resolution, and the main focus being on the contamination cleanup. Because yes, we do have a responsibility as a city and as a municipality to protect our shorelines, to protect our harbor fronts, to protect our waterfronts, our harbor fronts here. So my amendment would be to put on the table that upon the fifth year of the applicant's application, that they would have to revisit, come back to council to present how much they have spent in the cleanup of the contamination on the site. And in order to fulfill the additional 5 years, council would have to give approval for the additional 5 years. I'm not sure if that would be friendly and be able to put on the table, but I do think it is important for us as a council to partner and work on some type of decontamination of the site. It's something that we're going to be looking at other sites in the city, but there must be a way in which we can assist in this cleanup. We want to be the green city, the clean city, and the way that we're going to be able to move forward is partnering to help clean and protect our harbor fronts and waterfronts here. So I'm putting that on the table and see if it's friendly or not.
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask comment on it? Like, I understand what Councillor Townsend's trying to achieve. So we're approving, or maybe Councillor Townsend could comment on it, because I think it is friendly, but we're approving this, going to review it in the 5th year, and is your idea that if there's more expense that we can look at that to help the applicant, or is it more just to review it, they provide a report on how it's proceeding? And so maybe first it's two parts. Maybe the director of planning can comment first, and then maybe Councillor Townsend could comment on it. Does that make sense?
Okay, so Director of Planning, just in terms of the ability, so what we're looking at is, it looks like in the 5th year of the applicant's development, that the applicant come back to council to present how much they spent on the cleanup of the site to date, and that I'll look to Director Kitse for whether or not that's applicable.
Through the chair to the councillor, we would accept that direction.
Okay, then I'm fine with it. Councillor Townsend, I accept it as.
Okay, Councillor Littleton.
Councillor Littleton.
So, just to clarify to the point is that when it does come back in the 5th year, it's not to increase the amount. It's to ensure that they have met their expectation, right, and that council at that moment can decide whether they want to continue or terminate.
Okay.
That's friendly.
Okay, thank you, Council.
I do have one more. I'm hoping
No.
I do have one more friendly amendment that I would like to ask, is that in any point of an ownership transfer, the CIP becomes null and void, and I'm hoping that the movers will find this friendly.
Could I just get the Director of Planning to comment on that too?
Director of Planning?
Through the chair to the councillor, we would receive the applicant's costs of the cleanup within the first year. So if the councillor is looking for us to come back in year 5 with an accounting of how much money is spent in terms of the environmental cleanup and remediation, we're happy to do that. I do question, and it's not captured on the screen, why in 5 years we would then make a decision on whether or not to terminate the transfers. I don't seem to understand that part. And as far as if there's an ownership transfer, that the CIP become null and void, the entire CIP plan wouldn't become null and void. It would be the approval, but also at the same point, 5 years, we would have a different council, and are we prejudging a decision of a future role of council? Just something to think about.
So just to, I guess, to clarify my point, I suggested the 5th year because we know that the estimated cost, they've costed out at 1.3, which I've been very open about the fact that the 3.5 is far too high. So if we cut that in half, it would cover any of the costs of the remediation and the contamination on the site. So we're trying to figure out a way and how we can partner with the contamination, which we know based on what's happened with the rubber factories in Hamilton, it's going to cost significantly more than that amount.
So through the mayor to the councillor, the examples in Hamilton as far as the Randall Reef cleanup, the Shadow Creek cleanup, the Pier 8 lands, what they all have in common is that they're city-owned properties. And that's why there is a necessity for the city to partner with the province and the feds to decontaminate those lands. This is private property, so that's why we're not seeing the same level of intervention from the provincial and federal government. So it's not quite the same thing as what's occurring in Hamilton.
But they are building 1,300 units where they've partnered with developers to build those units on the site. There is a partnership between the developers and the actual city of Hamilton.
That's correct. On the Pier 8 lands, yes, that's correct.
And there's a portion of the property that was owned by the federal government that was transferred to the applicant. So there is public land owning on that as well. So we just want to be very, very clear as to the information that we're providing to council.
Mr. Just ask the Director of Planning, is there some wording, like you understand what Councillor Townsend's intent is there some sort of wording to capture his intent, like what he's asking for, like that you would suggest?
So it looks like there's this is a 10-year period for the application of the tax rebate, and based on what has been written, it looks like Councillor Townsend is looking for a surety that the work has been done and that there is an accounting of the cleanup of the site that can be presented. And if the site isn't clean to the at that point in time, then the council can make a decision as to whether or not they want to proceed with the remaining part of the tax rebate. So it seems like there's it's a check-in point. And I think one of the missing parts that the public don't understand is that all of the application here under the BTIF, which is the brownfield, has to be matched with invoicing. So it's not a gift to the developer. It's actually work has to be proven to be done. And I think the councillors looking at trying to ensure that the work has been done and the amount that has been spent is the amount that will be reimbursed, nothing more.
Okay.
Councillor, is that in this?
It is, and the focus is specifically towards the contamination, which we do know will be significant on this site. I really, looking at what other communities, again, over at Hamilton, who's cleaning up their harbor front, they've spent a lot of money to clean it up. Yes, it's city-owned, but yes, they've also partnered with developers. So I do believe that municipalities and cities do have a role to play here.
Thank you. And then the second point on the ownership of transfer, could we just clarify that the ownership transfer, that the CIP application become...
Yes, application.
Null and void. And that's a decision of council, and that'll be a decision that council makes at that time, if there's a transfer of ownership. Because it'll come back to council, and then the council will have to make a decision on that, but that's the recommendation from this council. Okay, so to the mover, you're fine? To the seconder, are you fine? Councillor Littleton?
Yeah, and just to be clear that's not redundant, like, isn't it, wouldn't it happen already?
It would come back to council. Regardless, it comes back to council for a final decision.
No, I'm sorry, didn't we hear that if there's an ownership transfer that...
It comes back to council for consideration. So the direction from this council will be to make it null and void, and council will have to make a decision on that. But it's not an automatic transfer.
And just sorry to clarify the above point, is that if they do not meet the requirements in the above, then the application is, again, null and void. So that hasn't been captured in that top part there, that upon the 5th year of the applicant's application, that the applicant come back to council to present how much they have spent on the cleanup, meeting the criteria. And if they have not met the criteria, then council at that time would have the opportunity to terminate the application.
Right. So again, leaving the decision of council, but providing direction that that's what a future council can consider.
But if they don't meet the criteria, don't they already not qualify, is my question. So it's redundant, is what I'm saying. See, they're both shaking their heads, the director and Ms. Jessica.
But it'll come back to council for that direction as well. See, right now, there's nothing in the staff recommendation that would have it come back to council at the 5-year mark. So I think what Councillor Townsend is doing is allowing council to have input by having staff come and present at the 5-year mark that X amount of work has been done, it meets the criteria, you can continue to move forward. Right now, that's not in the current application, so that'll be built into the agreement between the applicant and the city. So
right, but respectfully, I think it already is. It's the program itself is what I'm saying.
But in the program itself, there's no requirement to come back for council to seek further additional approval for the example, the 5 years beyond the 5th year.
If no work's being done, or if little work has been done, or if no remediation has been done. So it's just a check-in for the next council.
I think it does that. This is my whole point.
Okay, I'll go over to the director. And director, since there seems to be some confusion, can you clarify a bit more on this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll start, and perhaps the manager of planning can chime in. The existing community improvement plan states that the work has to be started within 3 years and complete within 5. In this instance, the environmental remediation work needs to start before foundations can even go into the ground because they require excavation. So we would know this information earlier, and staff have already committed to council to do annual reporting at the end of every year. The CIP, so we will not pay out if the work hasn't been done, and to pay out, the work has to be verified in the manner of which I spoke to earlier. As for the second paragraph the second edition there, it says that if there's an ownership transfer, that the CIP application become null and void. It shouldn't be application, it should be approval. That being said, if there's going to be an ownership transfer while the property is still under construction, then council would need to make a decision at that time if whether or not they would allow the approval to transfer. The one thing to think about, though, is that we want to make sure that when the property does transfer into the individual ownership of the condominium corporation, that this doesn't become an issue.
But, sorry, to the above point, it goes back to staff. It doesn't come back to council. I'm asking for it to come back to council. The above the fifth year of what I'm asking for is, yes, staff chime in and they check all the boxes to make sure they are meeting them, but I'm asking that to come back to council to basically a check-in point to see the progress on the site.
So through the mayor, perhaps I can clarify. I think maybe that's what should happen after project completion and not in the fifth year. Because if we're saying the fifth year, we would have already been paying out for 5 years, and the project would have been completed 5 years before that. So after approval, no money is spent or given to the applicant until they've fully completed the project and documented their costs. So we would have known in that first year how much they spent on remediation. So I think if you wanted to sort of meet the intention of what you're trying to do here, maybe the check-in point is once construction is completed.
You want to make that amendment, Councillor? That makes it sooner for council to take a look at this.
So the remediation and the contamination would be known, you're saying, within the first year?
So everything that's spent on the property, we would know what the actual costs of everything before we were to pay out year one.
So, but to get to year one, maybe 3 years of construction?
Yes.
So that's it. So it's not year one next year. It's
year one of payout.
Year one of payout, which could be 3 years away. So that would meet your horizon. It's just more about the construction completion of the project. So that probably does meet the timeline that you're thinking, and it does fall within the ability for council to take a review of it once the project is substantively complete.
That's fair. As long as there is a review in the fifth year to look at how much was spent on the decontamination of the site, then that would make the most sense.
To the manager of planning, could the language that you would look at there, what would it be?
I can type it out for the clerk and send it over.
Okay. All right. So we'll get that up there and ready to go. Okay, Councillor Kushner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions. What percentage of the environmental remediation is due to the heritage building, and what percentage is due to the new building?
Okay, Director of Planning. Or we do have Ms. Semple, like if Director of Planning, if you can direct it, you know your staff, I don't, so if you're able to direct it, so I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, I'll start. Thank you. Through the mayor to the councillor, the environmental remediation that has been discussed this evening has solely, if not predominantly, relates to the rubber factory and not building materials. There may be an aspect of building materials, but it certainly doesn't take up the majority of the 1.3 million that has been estimated to date. If the CIP coordinator has additional details, or if the senior project manager has other details in that regard, please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, that answer is satisfactory. Thank you. My next question is, the bottom floor is non-residential and the development gets 10 points. What happens if in a year or two they find that the non-residential component is not profitable, and can they convert that to residential? And that happened to a building that I lived in London, Ontario.
Through the mayor, I'll defer that to one of the other staff online.
Through the mayor, I can answer that question. The value of the incentive is based on the pre and post development property tax assessment. That assessment is directly reflected on the commercial versus residential tax rates charged. If the applicant was to change the commercial into, say, residential, that would change its assessment value and thereby probably needing an amendment to that application, and it would probably go before council.
Okay, but my concern is that 10 points for the non-residential first floor determines whether it gets more than 50 points or not. And so if in the future it's no longer there, that means it failed that test.
Through the mayor to the councillor, approval at this time is completely dependent on what the applicant has presented to council. If the applicant changes significantly, such as land use change, then that approval is not, there's no approval anymore.
Okay.
It could be rescinded. It could be rescinded.
The whole
Correct.
CIP grant can be rescinded?
I'll turn that one over to Ms. Josipovic.
Through the mayor, yes, it can. So if we run into a situation where that happens before construction is completed or before they're occupied, we can rescind. If that happens significantly, let's say in year 5 or 6, where we're halfway through payments, we can stop paying it.
Okay, because my concern is a developer, they have a lot of experience, and if I were a developer and I looked at the CIP program, I would certainly put the first floor non-residential and consider changing that in later years. And also, I would throw in a couple of affordable housing units. And therefore, I would pass on that basis, but that doesn't really affect anything except that they do get the grant. So that's the concern I have with the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Councillor Garcia. I'll go you, Councillor Garcia, and then Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have some comments on this whole application, and I have to tell you that even though you said this is not a reconsideration, I do find it very frustrating that we are here debating CIP for exactly the same project for the third time. It was October 2019 that we already voted against giving the developer $3.3 million of our taxpayers' money, which the region would have matched, so a total of $6.6 million in taxpayer subsidies. Then 4 weeks later, we rejected reconsidering the October vote, and now we're considering giving them even more, $3.567 million or $7.134 million when the region matches it. My understanding is they paid $6 million for the property, so we're talking about giving them taxpayer subsidies of more than they paid for the property. As I have stated before when we discussed these projects, a taxpayer subsidy such as CIP should only be approved for projects that would very likely not proceed without such subsidies, such as in a highly contaminated brownfield or a disadvantaged area of the city, or having a big affordable housing component. This is neither. The property is not highly contaminated in my mind, and I know that with all due respect to Councillor Townsend, I know that contamination can be very expensive, but this is in Hamilton. Hamilton was a steel town. It had all kinds of contamination everywhere, waterfront, everywhere. And, you know, I can say again, I have worked in the rubber industry myself as a tire design engineer in another life, and the tire business and the rubber business is not like the steel business in terms of the contamination. Now, Port is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. So here we are giving the developer potentially $7.1 million. And I emphasize that there is no affordable housing component, which was one of the reasons that we approved the CIP program. And throwing in one unit suddenly because a councilor asked for it is very worthwhile, but it's certainly not part of the application. They didn't put that in. They're just doing it to try to sell us on it. So, and by the way, I don't blame the developer at all for applying. If I were the developer, of course I would apply. It's a program that is there, and I hope to get it. So Just 2 weeks ago, we reinstated development charges in the city because we felt such an incentive was no longer necessary given the booming real estate market and extensive development currently underway. So now we're saying that something like this is desirable. With the very desirable waterfront location, the property we're discussing has likely appreciated by a very large percentage as it was purchased, as was mentioned by the speakers, meaning the owner already stands to make a significant profit even before any construction starts. So I should add that this applicant already received, in my mind, very, very significant help from the city when the application was first approved. Their application includes, as has been mentioned, adding 2 full stories to the existing heritage building, and then a new massive addition which is over 9 stories high. In addition to that, we have transferred additional public land to them to facilitate the development. The planning department at the time justified the approval of the application, saying it was in the spirit of the new secondary plan for Portalucy. However, the new secondary plan included a height limit of only 6 stories at this location, not 8 or 10. Also, the secondary plan calls for preserving views, as Ms. Kitay knows full well, and the addition that was approved will block the view of the harbor we now enjoy. People better understand that we will no longer be able to see the harbor from Lakeport Road except through a small little canyon where the Pier 61 building is now. That whole parking lot and open area will be blocked with the addition. Furthermore, the secondary plan is under appeal, and this means the applicable zoning at the time that this was approved had a height limit of only 11 meters or 3 stories. Yet we approved 2 stories on top plus a 9 or 10 story addition. I frankly believe the average resident of the city would be appalled at learning we want to give over $7.1 million to a developer to build luxury waterfront condos. And I must emphasize, because I asked the last time, this subsidy goes to the developer, not to the condo buyers. We have many pressing priorities in the city, as we have talked about, that we don't have enough money for, such as the crisis in affordable housing. And I note that the new CIP program, as I said a couple of minutes ago, was approved largely because it was supposed to help us create affordable housing, something this project application did not include or contribute at all. Therefore, I ask my colleagues on council to please support the Portalucy ward councilors in rejecting this unnecessary taxpayer subsidy for the 3rd time. And I repeat, I really care about Portalucy. I want to see the right development. Like, for example, with the Lincoln Fabrics, I would have been very happy to have that heritage building restored and adaptively reused, but we are adding 9 or 10 stories to it, which is all a huge profit for the developers. So I hope my colleagues will join me in rejecting this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Looking at Councillor, I'll go to Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Director Kitay, as Councillor Townsend pointed out on Appendix 3, there's $1.3 million indicated required for remediation. That could go up. If that's needed, it shows that the CIP award would be 3.5. Where does the rest go? Explain how the funding of the application is spent as far as we're concerned.
Through the mayor to the councillor, I think there's a misunderstanding of how the CIP is applied. It's not just a grant to cover remediation works. It's to achieve as many goals of council as possible. And some of those include heritage preservation, environmental remediation, intensification, mixed use development, in addition to affordable housing and some other things. What the award is based on is an 80% of the post-development tax assessment.
Correct.
And that's what the rate is that's been provided through the recommendation. So it's to achieve all the things that council has set through policy that they would like to achieve. It's not just a straight 1.3 for 1.3. It's to be spent on the development of the property to achieve all the things that council has asked for and set out in the terms of the CIP.
I realize it's not a check, as we would say, it's a savings, but over 10 years, the amount of the taxes not paid. Does he indicate where that money is spent, how that money is spent? And next question, along with that, as far as waterfront development is concerned, Councillor Townsend mentioned that. Is this money, can this money be spent on securing the waterfront and landscaping there, which would be used for public access?
Through the mayor to the councillor, and I can also defer to the manager of planning on this, yes, the funds can also go towards shoreline protection in addition to the other works as described.
Can we designate that would happen?
So I'll go over to, if I can go to the manager of planning services, in terms of just to provide a brief summary in terms of how does the CIP become applicable for things like public realm improvement, waterfront preservation, and heritage preservation, because I think that's where we got to become more informed as to that's where we've asked for the CIP to be applied, if you will, from the criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's what I was getting at.
Sure. So through the mayor, what we try to do is tie down things like remediation, heritage preservation, and mixed use through the eligibility criteria versus saying we can give you $1 million for just heritage or $1 million for just remediation, just because the scalability of it really does shift so much with the type of project that you're looking at. But what we're saying is that you have to hit certain minimums, and it can be qualitative and quantitative. So for something like the heritage preservation, let's say they were to demolish 90% of the building and keep a little portion, that doesn't qualify. What we're saying is that you're keeping most of the building, and that's what allows you to qualify. So whether we can say, okay, well, the actual amounts we give you, none of them are actually going to be physically spent on the attributes that you're talking about, because they're not going to get the money till after the project is completed. So most of the time, the money is actually spent for like financing purposes. You're paying back any of the loans that you've had. And we can go, if you would like a general kind of breakdown of the project costs, we can provide that.
So as a follow-up, if I can, Councillor Phillips, what people in the public may not know is that there's an accounting for the CIP that has to be tied to sort of the project elements that are part of the CIP. So brownfield remediation, we just don't say that we've approved a certain amount. There has to be invoicing that shows how the dirt was managed, how the site was decontaminated. If those aren't shown, they don't qualify.
Right. And it's important that the general public realize that if this is passed, because the last thing we want is to spend money outfitting the suite on the 10th floor.
And that's what I think Councillor Phillips was getting at to the manager of planning services, is that there is a significant accounting of the investments. It's not a blank check that's given to the developer.
And last question.
Through the mayor, if that's correct.
Sorry, last question to Director Kate. If this is turned down, the CIP is set up so that staff can approve a certain limit of funding without council's approval. If this is turned down, does staff have the prerogative to award that amount without council's approval?
Director
Through the mayor to the councillor, I think we would have to defer to council's will on that.
So I'll look to the CAO in terms of the question of delegated authority is lower than the amount. That's why it's here. If the applicant were to come back at a lower amount, does the staff have the ability to approve the lower amount as delegated?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, essentially the delegated authority gives staff that ability. If council so chooses to want to have that come back to council, that's of the opinion of council. However, I would suggest, and a lot of the discussions are around the what ifs, the actual agreement that will be, if this is in fact approved, will be based on very defined parameters as part of the approval and application process. And all of that will be in a legal agreement, which will have to be adhered to as well. So there are the necessary mechanisms, controls that will be put in place once and if this is, and like any other CIP program, if it's approved.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to staff, just for council's purposes and the general public, have you ever had to cancel a CIP because the developer didn't meet the criteria or didn't meet the timelines? Does this happen?
Through the mayor, we have run into situations where a development has significantly changed, so we brought it back to council for either reapproval or an amendment to the approval. And we have had ones where we've rescinded because it has not moved forward in a very significant amount of time. So yes.
Thank you very much. And then looking at the amendments, I do support the idea of these larger approvals coming back to council. Sometimes councils change over every 4 years, and in order to have a little bit more oversight and to gain some insight, it's important for council to understand a project from start to finish. So I like that idea. In terms of the ownership transfer, I just want some clarification. We're talking about the ownership transfer as it relates to like the overall development, right? Not each individual condo. I'm wondering if we could make that more clear, because I think what we're trying to do is protect the development. Sometimes we worry that a development gets approved and then it gets sold quickly as kind of like a development package for somebody else to develop. And every time that happens, the price goes up for the end user, right? And so I think this was Councillor Townsend's amendment. So can I ask Councillor Townsend to clarify or to make the language clear that we mean there's no ownership transfer during the construction period, and it relates to the developer, not to the individual condo purchaser. Like, we can't constrain condo purchasers, I think, right?
You're correct on that. It's thank you, Chair. Yes, it's specific to the property owner, and then obviously once it's transferred into ownership of the condo owners, then that it wouldn't be applicable.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the time and effort and the debate around the CIP. I think it's incredibly important. It's the first test of our new community improvement plan. We do want to see affordable housing, but I do believe that adaptive reuse of heritage buildings should be a priority for us, especially if we're moving towards a net zero city, because I think it takes about 50 years of energy to sort of rebuild a building, and 40% of energy-related emissions relate to building and construction. This is something that we need to be promoting and encouraging. Adaptive reuse of heritage buildings also creates additional jobs because it is more labor intensive. It is more expensive, and I had to stand there and watch a beautiful heritage building in downtown St. Catharines burn to the ground, and it was a building that was neglected, and the whole community said, what is council doing to protect these buildings and to encourage developers? I don't want to speak to this particular owner, but we are looking for developers who will come forward and say, yes, I commit to protecting the heritage of this building. It's important to me. I just have to reiterate, it was a unanimous council decision in 2015 by several councillors who are in this room to expand the application to the entire city, including Port Dalhousie. So this sent a message to the development community, and it sent a message to staff that this program was open for business for Port Dalhousie. So I think we, as a council, we have to be cognizant of that. I appreciate the changes to the program. Some of the developments that we did approve in Port Dalhousie in the past would not apply under the new program because they didn't have enough adaptive reuse or heritage preservation. So for all of these reasons, I am going to vote in favor of this. I am worried about sending a bunch of mixed messages, and we passed a policy. Our job is to pass policy, and something has to be completely out of line for us to vote against it. And according to the objective criteria and the objective recommendation of staff, it does meet the policy. I personally wish there's more affordable housing, but I think it's our job, and I think it's our job to push staff and the development community to have these conversations. And I want to see in the next development from this group of developers, like they said, in good faith, affordable housing. That is also a huge priority for the community. So thanks for listening to me. I'm going to be voting in favor of this application. At the end of the day, I worry about a cascading effect. If something happens and certain projects go offside and we have to wait another 5 to 10 years, the condos are going to be 3 to 4 times as much as they are right now, because there's certain things we can't control as councillors, and we know that some people bought them for $475,000. Nowadays, that seems like a good price, and I worry about the potential of some people missing out on what's now, for some people, affordable housing, because something might go south. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. Got Councillor Dodge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If through you to staff, if I could just have some clarification. So for the remediation, it's right now at 3%, but could it be up to 5%? And then for 80% tax rebate over 10 years. So is that is it capped now, or does it increase by over the 10-year period?
So go to the manager of planning services in terms of both of those.
So through the mayor, the current percentage of remediation is 1.3%. It could, like we've discussed, it could very well end up being more, but that's what we're evaluating at this point. And sorry, Councillor, could you repeat the second part of your question?
Second one was on the 80% tax rebate over 10 years.
So we actually calculate the grant amount based on that first year. So your post-development assessment, so once construction's completed and FPAC has reassessed the property, that's what we base our incentive on. We don't increase the incentive. We don't increase that 80%, even though their actual taxes keep going up and their assessments keep going up. So in reality, that 80% isn't really 80% by the time you reach a few years after the first year.
So in terms of assessment, in a 10-year cycle, there will be 2 tax assessment increases over a 4-year period. So that's not going to be included in this 10-year horizon. It's only the base increase after the first assessment. That's what it's attached to. So the city will gain additional dollars as the assessment roll in year 4 and year 8 roll out. We don't get there's no more of that would come back, meaning the taxpayer would actually get more of those increased dollars.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, just for clarification now. So the money that they're asking for now would be the money that we are doing, or would it be different by the time we go into construction and whatnot? Like they're asking for $7 million in total, just over, right? So will that change by the time, or is that set now? That's what they would get.
So through the mayor, we base our incentive amounts on a post-development assessment. So right now, the estimate is coming in at a certain amount, which gives the actual calculation of the grant at 3.5. Built into our plan, we've said that that estimate can't vary more than 5% from the actual. So in the past, we didn't have that, where your post-development assessment comes in much higher and we're tied to a much higher grant than what council approved. So we eliminated that in the new program. The assessment can only come in at 5% more. So the highest, I believe our calculation that it could be over the 8 years is about 188,000 more than what's currently on the application.
So they're projecting a reassessed value on that. They're using the projection of 69 million, I believe, is the projected when it's complete. That's what they project MPAC will assess it at. So the variance in that to the manager of planning is 5% either way.
Yes, so if it comes in lower, we use the lower amount. If it comes in much higher, we only use 5% more. So it could never come in as it's a safety guard. You can never come in at a much higher incentive value than what council approved.
So previous CIPs had that, which opened us up to higher risk, because if the assessments went up quickly, we would then be committed to paying that higher assessment regardless of what we forecasted. So there is a bit of a guard here.
Correct.
Okay, sorry. Can you just tell me then what if it did go up 5%, what would that number be then?
3.75.
Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Okay, Councillor Sorrento.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Director Kate, I heard a couple of times throughout the presentations tonight that there was this possibility that this application has been biased toward the applicant. Can you tell us, Director Kate, if this is a fact or if staff was totally objective on this application, please?
Through the mayor to the councillor, staff are professionals and they are always objective when they review applications, particularly in this instance where council has approved the eligibility criteria, the evaluation criteria, and the scoring numbers. How these items have been scored was included in the staff report so that it is transparent to the public on how these things were calculated. And that was included in Appendix 3. So the lens that staff always apply to every type of development application, CIP, Planning Act, Committee of Adjustment, or otherwise, is always professional, objective, and in the public interest.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just going to speak to this very quickly. I'll say this. The city is going to be enriched for many, many decades, should it be the will of council to pass this tonight. I think that the assessed value is coming in too low, Mr. Mayor. I know 2 years ago this was a $100 million project, 2 years ago, and with the increase in lumber and iron, I think this assessment isn't going to come in at 61 million, Mr. Mayor. I think it's going to come in more like 130 million. And I think that the assessed value isn't going to be 400,000. I think it's going to be much, much higher. Mr. Mayor, this council demanded a new CIP. We had input into the CIP. We had staff ask all of us for our opinion, and perhaps the applicant scored much lower on this particular CIP because it was much harder. It was a much tougher evaluation to pass. So we asked for the new CIP. This application passes it, but we're going to say no. I don't even know how we could even possibly rationalize that in our minds if we say no. The heritage component of this, Mr. Mayor, I believe 2 years ago was $7 million, and I'm going to guess right now it's probably closer to $11 to $15 million. We have a heritage permitting committee and a heritage advisory committee, and God forbid if something would have happened to that building, people would flip. I just heard my esteemed colleague, Councillor Porter, talk about the pain and the hurt that we have all had to go through at the devastation of this beautiful heritage building, the Welland House. So I can't even begin to imagine if something like that were to happen to this, God forbid, it shouldn't. So this heritage component is very, very important to this as well. The CIP, Mr. Mayor, I maintain should be changed to the Community Investment Partnership because that's what it is. It is an incentive. We approved it, and so now, you know, we appear almost, Mr. Mayor, to be discriminating. Well, we're going to give it to one particular person, but no, we're not going to give it to another particular person. We are not consistent. This goes to our reputation, Mr. Mayor. It does go to our reputation, and I certainly hope that my colleagues will pass this particular recommendation tonight. $130 million project, Mr. Mayor. We're going to get. The city is going to be enriched for many, many, many decades to come, just like the projects in Meriton and the old brickyard and so on and so forth. And I just can't even imagine how we could even consider saying no. So I'll leave it at that, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. And we got Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, yeah, things have changed since 2004. Things have changed since 2015, and certainly my vision for how Port Dalhousie would look, a human scale place that really retained its 18th or 19th century canal charm, that's changed. But I'm not going to get into a long history lesson here, history story. We heard from 4 citizens tonight, and I think they're very reflective of public sentiment and public will. And they see the fallibility in gifting extraordinary financial benefits to a private interest, and how, you know, it's contrary to the tenets of good government and frankly, fundamental fairness. When, as was mentioned, I think by Mr. Dink, when you make a deal for the few, it's the rest of us that have to pay more. So one person benefits, another person has to pick up the tab, has a cost applied to him, and that's not fair. That's not equitable. That's not about equality. That, you know, it's about applying the rules and everything equal to everybody. In Canada, the basic expectation is that we all pay our taxes, we pay our fair share. And to me, this policy record, you know, violates that basic principle. And $7 million is a lot of money to see transferred. I didn't vote for the last incentive for luxury condos on the waterfront, and I'm not voting for this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Littleton for the wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think one thing that we've kind of missed in this discussion is some basic math. You know, I love figures. Math, you know, one reason why I like math is because it's free of judgment. It's not biased. It just is what it is. And I think what we need to look at here is that currently this city is receiving $38,000 on an assessment of that property at $3.17 million. So once the property is developed, the assessed value is supposed to be about $71.57 million, which will garner about $445,000 in taxes. Right now, the only money the city is getting is the $38,000. So when we're talking about, you know, giving money away, when we're talking about we need more tax money to fund programs, as some of the speakers discussed, as we are all aware of the need for more tax money. This is one way that we get it. We can either raise taxes or we can create a new tax base. So that is achieving that goal. And I know that one of the speakers in particular was talking about the need to have more taxes. So when we look at this, some of us are still talking about this as giving money to a developer. That's not what happens. The developer, as he has already discussed tonight, has to front all of the costs. We're not giving money. I don't even know where the $7 million has come from. I didn't see that in the report. So I don't know why people are talking about that money. Numbers have to be accurate, and numbers tell the story. So what we're getting is a 78-unit condo building that is going to be a home for 122 people. That's what I heard. We have heritage preservation. We've said that's important. It has the public promenade and a park to enhance the public realm. Now, when we get down to the increase here, even if we are rebating up to 80% as in the program, I will get to the fairness of the program in just one quick second. If you do some simple math, 445,000 reduce minus the 356, that's going to give us about 89,000. I'm gonna round up to 90,000. That is a 230% increase in taxes that we will get when it is built from the derelict building that it is now, that is sitting there, and we don't want it to sit derelict. We need housing. We need all kinds of housing. Aside from receiving that 230% increase in property taxes, we will also be getting the folks that live there walking around in Port Dalhousie, spending their money, going out for dinner at the wonderful restaurants that are there. They will go and get ice cream at the ice cream shop. They will go for a coffee and sit and enjoy the beautiful surroundings, and they will get the running gear at Regatta Sport. This is also going to be a direct benefit to the people of this community. The other thing that happens in real estate is that is that there's movement. So what happens is when somebody downsizes their single family home and buys a condo, that single family home comes on the market, and perhaps a young couple or a single person says, you know what, I'd like to get into the home ownership. They move up, and then a rental unit becomes available. That is a common cycle in real estate, and that will happen at the more builds that we have. We are talking a lot about $1 million developments, and we just heard that a lot of these were sold at $450,000. Folks, we got to be real about numbers. $450,000 is not $1 million. And while I understand the sentiment, and we created an entire new CIP program so that we wouldn't be funding $1 million condos, that is not in our purview to making a decision on right now. The purchase price is not part of our CIP. We are not qualified to comment on how much the developer is going to make. We cannot be making decisions on whether we think it's contaminated enough, or it's in the old building, or it's in over here. The fact of the matter is, we created this program. We said we want this scoring. Staff, you must score according to this. That's what we did. When we talk about making a decision on what someone's going to have a view from a bridge or something, that's not what is in front of us. What is before us is an application for a program we created. There were some comments about right and wrong and fairness. We have to be fair. We created it. We created the scoring. We can't change the goal. We can't move the goalposts now. And I think that this application is before us, and we have to act in fairness. It scored 58. That was our parameters. And I think that that's what we need to do, and vote in favor of it today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Littleton. All right, can we, Councillor, for the wrap up? No, because you've already spoken, Councillor. That's fine. We only have one shot going around the horseshoe. Councillor Miller, you're up next, and then that's pretty much it.
Okay, I just one question to staff about Mr. Bekas questioned the brownfield remediation and the existence of it prior to the development. And could staff comment on that implication?
To the Director of Planning, or?
I can start. Through the mayor to the councillor. On page 2 of the report, we summarized it quickly. In order to be eligible for BTIF period, the applicant needs to undergo a phase 1, phase 2 environmental site assessments, and a record of site condition needs to be provided. So if contamination was, not present, then we wouldn't be here today. We have heard from qualified professionals that the property is contaminated due to it being a rubber factory going back over 100 years, and we have seen that there's a commitment to clean that up.
Okay, thank you. I guess just a few comments based on some of the things that I've heard. I think it's important that we remember that, yes, we created this program. I will once again point out that I've been against some of the criteria from the start, but I won't relitigate that. I lost that vote to increase the amount of affordable housing required for approval. That's a decision of council, but we also approved that these projects of significant costs, I believe it's $150,000 or more, would come to council, that any application scoring 50 or more points was eligible for approval. It wasn't rubber stamped for approval. It didn't mean it was automatically going to get approval. Certainly no one should be assuming on staff or in the development community that it would be approved. So it's certainly within our discretion. An application could score 100 points and we could turn it down. I certainly don't think we would, certainly don't think we should, but certainly within our rights. And this project scored 58 points, which is barely even getting to that eligibility point, and is asking for one of the most significant amounts of money that we've ever rebated. There's still, which is hard to believe after 2 years of discussing this, confusion about this money. the money is because the assessment value goes up. The assessment value doesn't go up for fun. It goes up because people are living there, and those people require city services and require water and require roads to be replaced at a quicker rate, which is what we then spend that $350,000 on. And instead of the private developer is making money on this development, you're asking a 90-year-old property owner in Meriton to pay that instead for 10 years. So let's not be confused about this. There's no check being written, but ultimately taxpayers are filling in that missing money that is in the pocket of the private developer. And there's no mechanism for this when this project makes money for the city to go and say, hey, how about we get some of that money back? So it's a risk that the developer takes. That's private enterprise. And I have a hard time, as everyone knows, believing that taxpayers should subsidize that. Having said that, I think staff have done a wonderful job on this report. Again, I'm fine with the criteria system. I think it's good to have objective numbers. I trust staff work diligently and objectively on this, but ultimately the reason this comes to council is not to pass judgment on where the developer is from, but ultimately it's to add context that's missing in numbers. Numbers are wonderful, but they're cold as well, and they don't tell the whole story. And certainly in this case, we're talking about a huge amount of money coming from the taxpayers of St. Catharines over a significant amount of time. There's a lot missing here, and I think the lack of core housing is one. The fact that this is on waterfront, some of the most attractive property in all of Ontario, probably all the world, is not included in this report or factored into our scoring in any way. So ultimately, that's why it comes to us. And the question we have to answer is, the ultimate question is, would this development happen without the CIP? Or would it happen in the same way? And when I ask that question on this project, I have to say yes, that it's hard for me to see how someone wouldn't be attracted to this project given the current real estate market. And so it's hard for me to look at taxpayers and justify them subsidizing it. And I'll just say, just because it came up again, the question of affordability, I work full-time, I work part-time. I couldn't afford $450,000 condo, and I make more. I make twice as much as the average wage in St. Catharines. So the idea that $450,000, we should be good with that, I mean, that's nowhere close to affordable. Because it's affordable in this outrageous context, the real estate market has boomed, doesn't help. It just highlights the issue that we currently have. So as I said, I can't justify the average taxpayer subsidizing this project. I wish Mr. Rosen, Mr. Falco, all the success. I hope to see it get developed. I just can't. Our exposure is far too great. The subsidy is far too great to justify taxpayers giving upwards of $7 million to a luxury waterfront development in one of the richest parts of town. So that's why I will once again be consistent and vote against this.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Okay, so everyone's had an opportunity to speak, and we're going to move on now because
yes,
it's already.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor. I didn't speak. I asked questions to staff, and I thought thereafter I would have the opportunity to speak.
I've confirmed with the clerk, and there's procedural bylaws that councillors speak once, and so we've had some councillors who have made speeches and didn't ask questions. You chose to ask questions, and that was your prerogative. But that is the decision.
Where is that in the bylaw, Mr. Mayor?
I'll turn it over to the clerk. She'll provide context.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, K4 under debate, general debate.
And can you read what it says to the clerk?
Members not to speak more than once.
Okay, speaking and asking questions I thought was different in the bylaw.
In council chambers, we would be going on until about midnight if everyone chose to ask questions and then decided to make a speech after. So you have one opportunity to speak on the matter, and unfortunately that's what's in front of us. And Councillor, you've had an opportunity, and so we're going to move on. It's already 9:30. We've been here since 6:30, and I think we can make a decision of council and move forward. So I'm going to call the question.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Mayor. Under the first clause, can we put an estimation as to when it may come back to council? Estimation?
Okay. So I'll look to the Margaret Joseph-Pofek, Manager of Planning Services, just estimate if possible.
Through the mayor, do you mean for the first to come back to confirm the project costs?
Yes, please.
I would say about 3 years.
3 years.
So can we put that in brackets, 2024?
So estimate in brackets, what estimate 2024?
After come back to council, brackets,
Thank you.
estimate 20. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay. To save time, because I'm not going to make any comments, Councillor, so I'll respect the fact that you ask questions, and I'm going to respect the Council's decision and time that I'm not going to actually have, because I can go on for about 10 minutes and point out a lot of things, but I think there's been a lot of discussion, so I think we just move to a vote now. So I'm going to call the question and go to the clerk.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
Yes.
Councillor Townsend. Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
No.
Councillor Garcia.
Absolutely not.
Councillor Harris.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
No.
Councillor Miller.
No.
Councillor Williamson.
No.
And Mayor Sendzik.
Yes. Okay, so we move on to 9.1.
And that's carried.
Okay, move on to 9.1, which is the Community Recreation Culture Services Centennial Gardens renaming. I have a mover and a seconder for that. Once it comes on the screen, I believe Councillor Littleton's moving it. Councillor Porter, you're seconding it. Councillor Littleton, would you like to speak to this first, or do you want a staff? Make a mouse. Do you want the staff to have comment? We're already at 9:30. It's a great report, so Councillor Littleton, it's your discretion if you want staff to provide some feedback on this.
I don't know that anybody would have questions about it, but if they do, they obviously should have the opportunity to ask questions.
Okay. I was just asking whether or not, Director Christie, do you want to provide some opening remarks, or are you comfortable with the report as it's been presented?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm comfortable with the way the report is presented.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Porter as a seconder.
Yes, I'm thrilled about this, and so is the whole community. I think this is, we've been talking about Richard Pierpoint and honoring him appropriately for a long time, and I want to thank members of the Black community who came and spoke with us, Councillor Littleton for pushing it forward, and of course Shelley Bush from the BME Church, who they've done all the work on this, and I think this is the right move forward.
Okay. Councillor Kushner.
I speak, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
You could have questions and a speech if you want. We have to do them at the same time.
Well, Mr. Mayor, this, I think, will be the easiest decision this council ever makes. Thank you.
That we can agree on. Councillor Miller.
Thank you. I'm very enthusiastic to see this and to see the public participation both before and during the renaming process. And I think hopefully this will illuminate future decisions about council. And what I mean by that is that history remains a dynamic field and not a static field. And just because we are changing the name of something, it highlights that we change our understanding of history. And I think Richard Pierpoint, who he was and his courage is timeless, and I think this honoring is incredibly appropriate, and it shows that we're willing to reanalyze history and to understand it better. Obviously, locally, we haven't done nearly enough to commemorate or celebrate the contribution of Black people in this community and all Black, Indigenous, and other people of color here, and I think this is a great first step, and I look forward to our sort of continued re-understanding and re-examination of history.
I don't think anybody could have said it any better, Councillor Miller. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I, like Councillor Miller, I fully support that. I think that it's so important to recognize the important contribution that Pierpoint made to this community and to the country. I just have a question for Director Christie. In terms of the area recognizing the centennial, can that plaque or information that we put up can we make sure that that's tied to be close to where the totem pole is going to be reinstated?
So I think, Director Christie, I think there was discussion with the Indigenous community about that, and I'll allow you to elaborate.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you, yes, we will be, we've already met with the Niagara Regional Native Center. The day after the public consultation period was completed, we met with the NRNC, and at that time it was discussed that we will meet again once council approves the renaming of the park, so that we can further discuss how we can honor the centennial and also honor the relationship that Richard Pierpoint had or may have had with the Indigenous community, specifically Six Nations. So to your question, Councilor Garcia, absolutely, we will put that on the floor as part of our discussions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no other further questions, I will call the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Littleton.
I'm sorry, respectfully, I do have some comments. I would have just ceded the floor so that in case anyone had questions, they could say it.
Okay, Councillor Littleton.
I do just want to thank Rochelle Bush so much for her contributions to this. She really...
Can you just lean into your mic a bit?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little bit more.
That's far enough. Okay, I'll speak louder. So I just want to say how much I appreciate Rochelle Bush and all the work that she did with this renaming. There was a lot of people, there were a lot of talks about this, we had some meetings, Councillor Porter and I, Rochelle was there and some other folks were there as well. And I'm pleased that we went through the process because I think the process is in place for a reason, and it was great to see so many people in favor of this. So I really feel like it's a community decision, but more than that, it's also bigger than just a park renaming. And I just want to acknowledge we received many emails from organizations such as the Black Cultural Society in Prince Edward Island, the Ontario Black History Society, the Bay of Quinte branch of the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada, the Friend of Laura Secord, New Brunswick Black History Society, Black Urbanism Toronto, Nunavut Black History Society in Manitoba branch of the UELAC, the Michigan Underground Railroad Exploratory Collection, the Amherstburg Freedom Museum, the city's anti-racism, equity and inclusion and heritage advisory committees, and also from the Queenston Neighbors. That's a group Councillor Miller and I sit on, and they're involved in the community. The gardeners who work in the park, who farm in the park, I guess you would say, we're very supportive. It was a unanimous decision from the group as well. This is really a community coming together and saying, we want to recognize Richard Pierpoint and we want to recognize our Black community in St. Catharines. And so I'm just very grateful for all of the work that went into this. Thank you to Director Christie and his staff as well, who moved really fast on this report. And I'm just really grateful to my colleagues as well for their support. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Littleton. And seeing those will be the last words on this, and I'll look to the clerk to call the question.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Littleton.
Yes.
Councillor Porter.
Yes.
Councillor Phillips.
Yes.
Councillor Miller.
Yes.
Councillor Kushner.
Yes.
Councillor Harris. Councillor Harris. Councillor Garcia.
Yes.
Councillor Dodge.
Yes.
Councillor Cisco.
Yes.
Councillor Sorrento.
A hearty yes.
Councillor Townsend.
Yes.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Mayor Sendzik.
Yes.
And that's carried.
And the only comment I would make beyond thanking Councillor Littleton and Councillor Porter for all the work that they've done is to all the staff who were involved in this as well. Director Christie and his team, Kathleen Powell from the St. Catharines Museum and all the work that she put into this. And I will just say that 10 years ago, I don't think this would have carried unanimously at City Council. We have come a long way as a community, and we've come a long way of our understanding of the need to acknowledge those who have remained in the shadows for far too long. And this park renaming, I think, really is an opportunity for our community to learn more And I encourage our community to go to the St. Catharines Museum and look at the history that is actually there. And also there's an exhibit that's currently at the museum that talks, it's a portrait exhibit of those who have, whose families are from the Underground Railway. And it's an absolute beautiful photographic exhibit of families whose ties go back to our community, to Chatham in Chatham, Kent, and other communities that were mentioned here, including New Brunswick, and to see the portraiture of those families really does bring home the importance of acknowledging all of our history, not just elements of it that were shown for a certain period of time. But this is a proud moment for, I think, all of council, and I think I could speak on behalf of all of council, that this is a proud moment for our community. So I'll leave it at that. I want to thank council and all of their efforts for bringing this forward with staff. And now we go on to calls for notice of motion. Are there any notice of motion? We have October 4th is our next meeting, so it's a pretty quick one. Turnaround time. Report request. We have Councillor Phillips. You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This report would be directed towards TES. This summer we had significant problems at Rawls Farm as far as parking is concerned. We had parking on both sides of the street outside of the, well, all the way down to the new subdivision at times. We had transports that refused to go into the industries because they couldn't get through the parking. We had people walking down the middle of the street. So what I'm requesting is a staff report to investigate the possibility of expanding a parking lot at Rawls Farm to be included in this year's capital budget, if possible. Well, it's very important we do this because we can't have the same situation next year that we had this year. It was very, very dangerous. And with the expansion of the Rotary Playground, we're getting more people there all the time. So if we can make that happen as soon as possible so we can conclude it in the capital budget for next year, that'd be great. Thank you.
So that's the key, councillors, that you want the information back while we deliberate the capital budget for 2022?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we just put that in there, Evan, for the estimates to be brought back. Councillor Cisco, I got your hand up first, and then I'll come to Councillor Dodge.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, it was actually a notice of motion that had been submitted to the clerk's office.
Okay, so we'll go back up to that once this is done. Okay, notice of motion. Councillor, oh, there you go. Thank you for submitting it to the clerk.
And it's just with respect to the CAO's verbal report and the concerns about additional expenditures related to COVID recovery and discussions with the CAO. Because of the strains this will put on the municipal finances and the lack of any sort of funding right now, additional funding from provincial or federal levels of government, we're asking, the motion will ask staff to develop a multi-year fiscal plan that would be included in the 2022 budget deliberations. And this is for, this is a notice of motion, obviously. So I will have a seconder and there may be some wordsmithing, but this is the general idea.
Okay, so that'll come back for the October 18th meeting. And we'll have some more details on that. Thank you, Councillor Cisco. And we head into second report request. We got...
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
Can I speak to Councillor Phillips? Can I make some amendments to that?
Sure, like we're just asking for a report back, so what else do you want in the report?
Well, I'm just wondering, and if in the report they could look at possible green, instead of like maybe making asphalt, something like a green parking lot that would, you know, complement what's already there with our green space.
Okay. So for staff to understand the request, it's looking at different forms of parking that may not simply just be asphalt. And I'm getting a nod from Director Martuccio, so I think that's applicable.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips. Thank you, Councillor Dodge. Councillor Garcia, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I submitted a report request. I just want to ask staff to report on reviewing the issues, potential issues with bird feeders and seed, and also what other municipalities are doing. I've heard from residents that are concerned that about seed being spread everywhere, or too many bird feeders, or not enough, and I think it's something that we should at least have an idea about. I understand other municipalities do have rules about these things. So just like to hear from staff, and there is no, I'll ask the CAO for timing as to when, you know.
Before that, I broke out in a smile because my mom and dad have bird feeders. They have a lot of them. So that's why I'm just thinking of my dad right now, what he would say. So.
Well, you know, this ties in with when you laughed about my rat motion, and the feeders are tied directly to rats.
Okay,
You'll have to declare a conflict of interest, Mr. Mayor.
To the CAO.
Likewise, Mr. Mayor, conflict of interest.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so the councillor and I had some conversation this afternoon about this motion. So there was a report that was brought forward to council back in 2016. You know, this is something that would come back sometime in 2022, the report. If my request was to bring forward the report that we had previously brought. There's some more information that you're looking for. So it's not a high priority at this point for us in terms of staff workload, but we'll bring it back as quick as we can.
Okay, so staff report for Happy Ralph's, all in favor? Carried. Staff report for bird feeders and backyards. Okay, opposed? For my dad. Okay, that's carried. All right, we just got to quickly move on to committee and task force minutes. Got a motion to receive and file the minutes of the advisory committees of council. Moved by Councillor Dodge, seconded by Councillor Sorrento. All in favor? That's carried. And the next one is there's no closed session, thankfully. Bylaws, reading of bylaws. That the bylaws listed on council agenda A through F be read a first time, considered and passed. They be signed and executed by the mayor and city clerk. Got to have a motion. Councillor Phillips, seconded by Councillor Townsend. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Being no further motions, we adjourn the meeting. I need a Councillor Williamson, seconded by Councillor Cisco, is clearly past his bedtime, so all in favor? Carried. Good night, Councillor Cisco and everybody else. Take care. Have a good meeting. Have a good night. Take care.